What's the deal with this haircut? I have no idea how to organize all this information. I spent the last 6 months of my life reading as much delinquent manga as I could get my dirty little hands on. The thumbnail is not a lie. I did read over 5,000 chapters of manga, and I probably read over 100,000 pages. I just noticed that delinquent stuff tends not to come up a lot in discussions about the history of anime and manga, despite the fact that there's so much of it. It feels sometimes like delinquent art and media is all on its own little island, its rivers only seeping into the vaster sea of culture when a non-delinquent manga decides it wants to have a delinquent character. My goal with this video is to Number 1. Demystify the delinquent category of manga. Japanese delinquent media doesn't have as much presence in the West as other stuff, I guess because all of it has such heavy roots in Japanese culture. You don't have to do as much legwork to sell a non-Japanese audience on a sci-fi or fantasy or martial arts action comic from Japan. These are things that, while they may be rooted heavily in Japanese culture, still have enough broad appeal that a non-Japanese person can still understand it. Juvenile delinquency in Japan, however, is so fundamentally dissimilar to delinquency anywhere else that it probably would have been hell trying to navigate the cultural differences for any publishers back in the 80s and 90s. I will let you know that in addition to the absurd amount of manga I've read, I also read 2 sociology books. Well, I read one entirely and then I read sections of the other because it wasn't as interesting, but 2 sociology books, man, that's kind of a lot for me. Number 2. Make you feel what I felt during the research phase of this video. I have something to say about almost everything I've read, but there's some stuff that I have very little of interest to say about. I'm still gonna say it. I could have made this a concise, comprehensive video with organized thoughts and a thesis, only covering a handful of the art that I experienced, but that would be unfair to me. I read a lot of shit. I read some real dog shit. You will feel my hatred. Number 3. A power ranking to determine which characters are the strongest. I'll be going mostly in chronological order, but I will deviate from that if I think it's necessary. Well, hold on. First of all, if we want to read every single delinquent manga, how do we even define what a delinquent manga is? Is it any manga that has a delinquent character in it? That's too broad. What about any manga with a delinquent main character? Well, there are some manga that I think definitely fall under the delinquent category that have non-delinquent main characters. And what do we mean when we say delinquent anyway? Is it any character who is a juvenile and has committed a crime? Based on what I've read, that doesn't check out. Some delinquent characters are actually fully grown men, but are treated as delinquents because the story is so ridiculous that a 30-year-old in high school is just normal. And there are some characters who are kids and who have committed crimes, yet I would not call them delinquents the way we imagine them to be. You would think then that I'm just discussing Yankee manga, but no as well, because there's plenty of delinquent manga, especially in the 60s and 70s, where the characters don't really embody any Yankee aesthetics. Let's establish the parameters, shall we? We're going to be talking about manga and anime. I've watched some movies and some live action shows, and we will be talking about those. Actually, now that I'm saying that, I don't know if I'll be talking about any live action shows, but whatever. That's not what this video's about. I also won't be discussing any Korean manhwa. I wanted to focus on the Japanese phenomenon of delinquent stories, so I'll leave the manhwa to whoever the resident expert is on Korean manhwa. I was also only able to read stuff available in English, which is honestly not that much. Of the nearly 180 manga and anime I searched for, there were at least 40 manga with no English translated chapters whatsoever, and there were a lot more incomplete translations, either with the scanlator still uploading chapters, or, more often than not, having dropped the series altogether. You may find yourself looking at the title and asking yourself, wait, how can you call this the definitive delinquent manga video if you haven't read everything? It's entirely possible that a more definitive video can be made. Then I'll be happy to change my title to second most definitive delinquent manga video. I don't need to be the one guy who made the video. I'm satisfied to just get the ball rolling. Also, most of this video is just my opinions, so it's hard to even say if this is definitive or what a definitive video on such a subject would look like. Also, I do try to do my due diligence, but reading sociology books is new to me, and I'm dealing with a culture I'm not a part of, so while I do try to be as accurate as possible, I am open to being corrected on my mistakes. Let's look at the numbers. In total, I looked for 179 manga. Unsurprisingly, the splits are as follows: 85 shonen, 50 seinen, 19 shoujo, 4 josei, and 21 miscellaneous. We have 1 Kodomo, some mobile and web publications that don't seem to organize by demographic, and some boys love, which is a thing in itself. In case you're curious, the splits for the most popular magazines look like this. Now, let's begin our journey from the beginning of all delinquent manga. Otoko Ippiki Gaki Daisho. Yuyake Bansho. Harris no Kaze, I guess? Okay, it's actually kind of impossible to tell what the first delinquent manga in the world is. Yuyake Bansho and Harris no Kaze are not listed as delinquent manga on either My Anime List or Anime Planet. According to the admin of the Hokuto no Gun Discord server, who is about as reliable a source as you can get for this kind of stuff, delinquent manga is derived from sports manga, and we can see that in these two. Harris no Kaze is unavailable in English, but we can tell from Wikipedia that it's about a snot-nosed brat who keeps getting into trouble, and the principal tells him to do a bunch of sports instead. You can see the making of so many future sports manga already. Slam Dunk stands out to me, but King Golf, Rookies, the Rookies ripoff, Angel Voice, all are, to some extent, about delinquents channeling their burning feelings and passion into sports rather than fights. Not only is the manga for Harris no Kaze untranslated, but so are the 2 anime. Actually, just a few days ago, as of writing the script, one of the anime for Harris no Kaze got released. Never mind, it's AI upscaled. Forget it, man. We have a little more information on whose anime is currently lost and whose manga is untranslated. This is the earliest instance I can find of a manga using the term bancho, not only in the title but in the story as well. If you don't know what a bancho is, then think of it as a title for a leader of a gang of school delinquents. Not the boss of a motorcycle gang or an organized crime unit, just a student gang. In this Yuyake Bancho story, main character Chuji Akagi is a small-town hick who moves to the big city, and his new school is ruled by the fearsome Bancho Alliance, who are full of bad guys. Chuji beats the Alliance's goons one by one and makes them turn into good people. They start playing sports and make a bunch of sports clubs. Chuji then chooses to join the boxing club, where he develops a rivalry with a guy who, according to the guy who summarized this manga for me, is basically just Rikishi Toru from Ashita no Joe. Already we're starting to see some trends. A kid with a strong personality, a sense of righteousness, and a solid right hook ends up beating the shit out of all the bad kids and making them follow him. Keep that in mind as we enter the halls of the first manga we can actually read, the first 50 chapters of Otoko Ippiki Gaki Daisho, translated by the scanlation group Hokuto no Gun, which you will see again in this video. I want to preface this by saying that I spend a decent chunk of time summarizing the story. I don't do that for every story, just for the parts that I think are interesting and warrant discussion. I especially do that for these early manga because they set the stage for what comes later. Togo Amankichi's father died at sea, saving the lives of some people. The village is full of cowardly men who let him die alone, so none of them even approach Mankichi's father's manhood. Mankichi himself, despite being a child, clearly took after his father's manly and principled attitude. Because that's really the main draw of the story, throwing obstacles at Mankichi to test his manhood, or what I would call principles and conviction, but we'll call it manhood because that's what this and every other delinquent manga calls it. Mankichi starts off the story as kind of a wild child. There is no one he won't beat up, without some measure of good reason at least. He even beats up the mangaka Hiroshi Motomiya in the first chapter. He's strong, he doesn't lose one-on-one fights, and he's nothing if not admirable. Mankichi wins the hearts of men and boys across the land with his manliness, with the same ease that I think the author imagines he wins your heart, audience member. He wins their hearts with his words, his actions, and the fists he has to back those two up. Though he is but a boy, he is also a man amongst men. Remember that term, man amongst men. The early parts of the manga are all about his misadventures. Most delinquent manga like to start off with some kind of comedy slice of life angle before getting into all the action and stuff. Most of the early chapters in Gaki Daisho are about Mankichi refining his manhood and increasing his army of underlings. Guys will hear the name of Togawa Mankichi from the next town over and come around with their lackeys and challenge him. Before the first volume is over, he acquires over 800 underlings. This technically makes him a bancho, but people don't really call him bancho, they call him taisho, a different title that implies leadership. There's so many schools with strong guys and so much delinquent lore. Shit like, you may have beat me, but there's someone stronger in this town. Shit that we'll see a lot of later. It seems that the more underlings you have, the greater your manhood. The magnitude of your manliness is measured in how many men's souls you can reach with your actions and your words. The strength of a guy's manliness compels other men to submit themselves to him. The more of a man you are, the more you recognize another man's manliness. And if his manliness exceeds yours, you either have to challenge him or submit yourself to him, sometimes both. Maybe to learn from him the ways of manhood, maybe to emulate him. Maybe for the joy of serving him and enacting his will, the joy of embodying the soul of a great man. So much of this manga is about Mankichi being a capital GM great man. You would think because it's a delinquent manga that they spend all their time fighting, but no. Mankichi gets into the stock market.
Here comes the money.
I'm serious.
Here comes the
Stop that. The main character of one of the first delinquent manga of all time gets deep into the stock market and makes huge wins all because of his manly spirit. This happens very early on. The story turns into a kind of Charles Dickens Great Expectations type story, while still retaining the delinquent action stuff. And then he vows to become the richest man in Japan, kinda like Naruto's Hokage dream. In this world, proficient stock market analysts have the same aura as martial arts masters would in another manga. Stock market trading is framed as fighting in the adult world because Mankichi can't solve all his problems with his fists. What you can't solve with your fists, you solve with stocks. So he hits the books, and by books I mean this kind of shit. Oh yeah, he also acquires an army of homeless people that he uses as a military force to protect his investments. I wonder if any of that is covered in Stock Investing for Dummies. Through some shenanigans that I'm not going to summarize here, Mankichi ends up in high-security juvenile prison, which is one of the great settings for delinquent manga arcs. Not juvenile prison, high-security juvenile prison, to show you how dangerous these guys are. Most of the manga we go over won't actually show you the inside of a juvenile prison, but it does appear quite a bit in manga from the 60s and 70s. Ashita no Joe, for example. I know it's not considered a delinquent manga traditionally speaking, but why shouldn't it be? Yabuki Joe is a troubled youth who's been in and out of foster care since he can remember, and is only saved from the streets by boxing. Kinda reminds you of Harris no Kaze and Yu Yakebancho. Anyways, very early on, Yabuki Joe gets sent to high-security juvenile prison, much like Mankichi. And while there, he instantly picks a fight with the cell leader. We can call this guy the Cell Bancho. They don't call them that in the manga, but I'll call them that. Joe, to my memory at least, I haven't watched the anime in a while, beats up Nishi, who then becomes a docile guy. I wouldn't call him a follower of Joe for the entire story, but while they're in juvie, he definitely is. Likewise, Togawa Mankichi challenges the Bancho of the cell he's assigned to, but in a different way. He's made to be ganged up on and beaten day in, day out strategically in such a way as to deny him sleep. They had done this to two other guys, and one died and the other went insane. As a testament to Mankichi's manhood, however, he manages to survive this lynching, though I won't spoil for you how. A resistance to physical pain and torment is yet another great trope of delinquent manga we'll see repeated in the future. An indomitable will, unconquerable by the forces of biology and the material world. I want to wrap this section up by contrasting Ashita no Joe with some of the other manga we've just covered. Joe, like Mankichi, spreads his name across the land, and indeed the world, and acquires followers in the form of neighborhood kids and fans all over the country. He has a resilient spirit, a brand of toughness that these stories often paint as unique to the Japanese national identity, particularly to those Japanese men who grew up immediately after World War II, when the Japanese economy was in shambles and the emperor had just stopped being a god. Ashita no Joe is not as optimistic about sports as salvation as most other delinquent sports manga. It doesn't seem optimistic about any kind of salvation for those whose souls have so long been isolated that no light can reach them. Delinquent youth is far from glamorized in this story. Not saying that's better or worse, I'm just making the comment as I see it. It may romanticize the hardship a little, but only in the same way that an old man reminiscing on his tough, hard life will speak fondly on those tough times. Ashita no Joe feels like a story told through the lens of an admirer of Yabuki Joe, who grew up in those same hard times as he did, but who actually managed to make it out, and now has the distance to look back on those moments and paint a beautiful picture out of it. While Joe may not be a gang leader, he does inspire in his fans a feeling comparable to what Mankichi and Chuji inspire in their followers. They all seem to have an effect on men that can be boiled down to this. This is the effect a so-called man amongst men seems to have on other men, inspiring a fire in their souls that, to some, may even seem a bit homoerotic. You notice how all these characters are wearing the same hat? They're all wearing school caps that are at varying degrees of falling apart. Well, Joe's hat isn't a school cap, but still. My guess is that it symbolizes poverty, or maybe that they just don't care. I'm going to be going outside of chronological order to discuss the next few manga because they all fall under a lineage of sorts, all of which are inspired to some degree by Gaki Daisho. The reason I want to go on this tangent is to show how far the direct influence of this manga goes. There's certainly other manga that are influenced by Gaki Daisho, but none as concretely as these ones. Also, there's some manga that came out in between these ones that I don't think are very heavily inspired by Gaki Daisho, and I want to discuss those at their own pace. Skeban Arashi was made by Masami Kurumada of Saint Seiya fame. You can barely read a single thing by Kurumada without seeing how much he worships Motomiya's work. You look at Skeban Arashi, for example, and instantly tell that this guy loves Gaki Daisho. The main character, Rei, is like a girl version of Mankichi. She lost a parent when she was young, this time a mother. But instead of following in her dead parents' footsteps and becoming a womanly woman, the way Mankichi follows his father's path and becomes a manly man, Rei goes hard in the other direction. This one is very much a comedy, or at least an attempt at a comedy. The story goes to great lengths to show you how unwomanly Rei is. She's unrefined, dirty, sloppy, and according to the characters in the manga, she's irredeemably ugly too. But that doesn't stop Kurumada from taking every opportunity he can to show us her panties. I don't feel very good about this. So while Mankichi follows in his father's footsteps and is a man amongst men, Rei struggles to follow in her mother's footsteps to be a womanly woman. She just can't stop getting into fights and beating the shit out of people, boys and girls and adult men alike. She's a bit goofier than Mankichi. I mean, the whole story is goofy, but she is pretty Mankichi coded, I'm not gonna lie. Look at how these girls create a genius human crossbow. I can't remember why her titties are out. The entire second half of the manga is dedicated to a rollerblade football match for the fate of the football team. Once again, a delinquent finds an outlet for their energy in sports. You can see Gaki Daisho all over this manga, in the art, in the way it's paced, despite the fact that it has very different aims from Gaki Daisho. Where Kurumada would really show his Motomiya fanboyisms is in Otokozaka. I can't discuss Otokozaka that much because it hasn't been translated to English, but I did read the first chapter with my friend who knows French, and there's a blog where a guy who did read it kind of summarizes the story for us. It seems that, while Gaki Daisho is about a kid trying to take over Japan by becoming the richest man in Japan, Otokozaka is about a kid trying to take over the world through fighting. I get the impression that this is a way more action-based story than Gaki Daisho is, with way less stock market analysis and way more punching, the way we're used to. I also get the impression from this blog post that Otokozaka is meant to be Kurumada's magnum opus. I get the impression because the blog calls it his magnum opus more than once. Otokozaka is probably most well known for its infamous ending. It got cancelled abruptly, and instead of putting the words "the end," Kurumada put the word "incomplete." This pseudo-ending with the main character running up a pathway to the sky has been parodied to hell and back in Japanese media. The blog post speculates that the reason it got cancelled was due to the landscape of shonen manga changing away from the stuff that Motomiya made to the point where even Motomiya himself struggled to keep his stories from getting cancelled. It also speculates that Kurumada was a big part of shaping this new shonen landscape himself with Saint Seiya, among some of his other work. By being a part of the groundbreaking new wave of shonen, he ended up shaping audience tastes and sensibilities in such a way that the stories he idolized no longer had a place. In a twist of irony, it's very likely that Kurumada helped make it impossible for himself to create his own magnum opus. Apparently, Kurumada was able to bring it back in 2018 to finish it off, so in the end, he was kind of vindicated for putting that incomplete on that last chapter. Now let's talk about one of Motomiya's other descendants. Shiritsu Kiwama Michikoko, or Ultimate Path Private High School, is a manga made by Akira Miyashita, who talks a lot about how much he admired Motomiya's manga. I don't know what it is, man. I can't find the interview. I'm looking all over. I thought I saved the link, dude. Like, did I invent this in my head? What the fuck? Miyashita had a career in the 80s and a legacy in shonen manga comparable— I think you mean comparable— to that of Kurumada's. If his later manga, Otokojuku, got a more robust anime adaptation, it might have made it over to the West, where it would have easily been a smash hit, alongside Saint Seiya. I say this because I literally cannot count how many Otokojuku spin-offs there are, all in Japanese, only translated to English unofficially. But let's bring it back to Ultimate Path Private High School. This story is about a bunch of very widely built guys who go to a school that teaches them how to become good Yakuza. According to the narrator at the start of the manga, this is the absolute manga about intimidating, long jacket wearing, violence starting, abnormally ridiculous, unreserved, eye-catching hardasses. Every student in this manga looks like he's 30 years old, and some students actually are 30 years old. It's a trend in Miyashita's manga, and really delinquent manga as a whole, to have guys who are so stupid they get held back for several years, sometimes decades. The main character here is Skullcap Masa. You may remember him from his later work in JoJo's Part 3. I actually can't find any confirmation from Araki on whether or not Jotaro was inspired by Skullcap Masa, but I'm gonna make the bold statement that he was. Masa's a very level-headed guy compared to his loud and obnoxious classmates, and unlike Jotaro, this guy actually knows how to smile. Masa and his friends Astro Boy, Rising Sun, and Mickey Mouse get up to a bunch of shenanigans and misadventures, ranging from getting raped by the old lady who runs the dorms, to getting revenge on her by killing her cat and cooking it to make her eat it, to giving blowjobs to cows. And then the old rapist lady sees the cow's gigantic cock and tries to fuck. I need to move on from this subject or the rest of this video is going to be a black screen. One thing to take note of with Ultimate Path Private High School is the dichotomy between the delinquent spirit of rebellion and the identification with a Japanese national identity, particularly with Japan before they lost the war. The rising sun flag, the Yamato Damashi spirit, and the strong presence of a military aesthetic. To an extent, it feels like Akira Miyashita is trying to poke fun at how ridiculous this culture of manliness and worship of the nation is. But, and I may be reading a little bit too deep into this, it also feels like Miyashita has a longing for that simple worldview, where manliness and patriotism were all you needed. I imagine Miyashita is saying with this manga, we lost the war, why are you guys still like this? It obviously didn't work. But I imagine he's also sadly saying, man, these guys are so cool. And they are. He specifically creates a story where these guys can be cool as hell because of how ridiculous they are. On that level, it kind of works as wish fulfillment for those who wish that this ideology actually meant something in the real world. For those who want to live in a fantasy world where this sort of militaristic, nationalistic, manhood-focused ideology actually leads to some kind of results. actually leads to winning fights, particularly against Americans. I think Miyashita was probably sad when his manga got cancelled for the dumbest reason of all time. According to various sources, including the Hokuto no Gun Scanlation Team website, which I genuinely consider to be a reliable resource, back in chapter 39 when Tamasaburo was showing Masa the badges from the schools that Ultimate Path had crushed, apparently one of Miyashita's assistants snuck in the name of a real school, and the school administrators were furious and complained to Shueisha about it. The blame all fell on Miyashita for a lack of oversight, and Ultimate Path was cancelled. No tankobon were released beyond the first one, which soon went out of print, and the manuscripts were either lost or destroyed. But if you're disappointed, don't be! The characters come back in Miyashita's next manga, Geki Gokutora Ika, or Rage, the Gokutora Family. I don't have as much to say about this one, but I'll mention a few things. This story's main character is a guy called Tora. He's a country bumpkin, much like Mankichi and Rei and Chuji. Through his strength and his conviction, he is considered by the story to be manly, but his manhood is unrefined. He's unable to control himself around booze and women, which is something we'll discuss a lot about later manga. Tora seeks to enter juvenile prison alongside Skullcap Masa, because in Miyashita's stories, juvie is not a place to be avoided, it's a place to go to refine your manhood. Remember that phrase, refine your manhood. This story is way crazier and more off the rails than Ultimate Path, but in ways I'd rather you get the opportunity to experience yourself instead of me just summarizing the shit that happens. Really, I just want to highlight one chapter from this manga, and forgive me for any inaccuracies, I'm kinda reciting this from memory. Early on in the story, Tora meets a guy called Oshio Heihachi, a man who single-handedly defended his townspeople against 100 Yakuza and ended up getting sent to Abashiri as a result. So great is his renown that on his return, the people sing his praises. They hold up traffic to have a parade in his honor. Women ask him to hold their babies so that their babies will be strong like him. All he can say anymore is, Abashiri's nights were so cold. It's over for him. So young, but he's already dying. Even his father, a doctor, cannot save him. Despite meeting him so recently, Tora admires him tremendously, staying at his side while he dies and doing everything in the world for him. Eventually, some old lackeys he kicked out of his gang return, and they demand complete control of the gang. Oshio, still sick, gets up and beats the fucking shit out of them. His father takes out his stethoscope and listens to his chest. He grabs his wrist. Oshio tells him to be silent, and he orders his men to get his jacket. He proclaims, Oshio Heihachi's about to fight his last fight on Earth. Oshio defeats the entire gang of villains by himself. Tora says he looks like he could live 100 more years, but no. He is already dead, and he has been dead for days. No heartbeat, no pulse. His last words are the only words that mean anything to him anymore. Abashiri's nights were so cold. This moment highlights a key aspect of the delinquent soul that persists in manga to this day. A spirit that rules the body so entirely that even death has to wait at the door. A mind that defies its body's limits and holds on just for the sake of victory. An overriding of any fear of bodily harm or death. A kamikaze spirit. We see this as well in the aforementioned Otokojuku, which is kind of a delinquent manga, but honestly this thing becomes way more of a martial arts action story once it stops being a gag manga. Otokojuku and all of its spin-offs deserve a video of their own. This is the manga where Miyashita pulls out all the stops when it comes to both criticizing and admiring the Japanese nationalistic perception of manliness. This is a story all about guys enduring unreasonable levels of physical pain for the dumbest reasons of all time for the sake of refining their manhood. This is where Miyashita makes it very obvious that he's making fun of this outdated mentality. Each panel is loaded with politics, like look at this one. Do you understand? The purity and chastity of Japanese women are coming under threat of the venomous fangs of foreigners. This is a crisis that Otokojuku must not ignore. After all, cars and men are our prime exports. Keep in mind he says this immediately after getting rejected by a girl at the club. You, as the reader, know it's all bullshit. Even the other guys in the room know it's all bullshit. The ultra-nationalistic, hyper-masculine rhetoric that these teachers use to indoctrinate these guys is always rooted in some insecurity of their own. By the way, I'm not saying that Miyashita directly thought all of this stuff, I'm just saying how I read it. It doesn't matter if Miyashita intended or did not intend for any of these readings. I haven't really mentioned it, but all of Miyashita's manga includes some kind of conflict with foreigners, particularly Americans. They also all include some kind of gigantic guy, whether it be the student council president of Ultimate Path, the Americans in Geki, or my favorite, Otokojuku no 3号生筆長 The big guy is rarely on the side of our protagonists, at least at first. Miyashita really shows off his creativity for inventing torture mechanisms in this manga. My favorite is the whack-a-mole game, where the mole is you and the hammer is a knife, and you're trapped in a box and the box is full of water, so you have to stick your head out to get air. But the longer you keep your head up for air, the better the chance the guy has of killing you with a knife. A very multifaceted torture that you must endure for the sake of your manhood. But really, it's just a senpai torturing their kohai and making excuses for it. Otokojuku began in 1985, only a year after Otokozaka began. But if they're both inspired by Motomiya, then why was Otokozaka cancelled while Otokojuku ended up running for over 300 chapters and spawning a veritable tidal wave of spin-offs? That's very difficult for me to say. From the blog post, it seems that Otokozaka was a very action-heavy manga with our main character fighting delinquents from all over the world, while in Otokojuku we spend the first like 20 chapters or so getting up to the same shenanigans we got up to in Ultimate Path and Geki. But key to Otokojuku's success, I think, is its transition from comedy to serious but still ridiculous martial arts action. Otokojuku takes influence not only from Motomiya, but also Tetsuo Hara's Fist of the North Star, which every single successful manga did in the 80s. Tetsuo Hara himself in 1995 would also try to make a true successor to Gaki Daisho, much in the same vein as Otokozaka, with a manga named Takaki Ryusei. But if it didn't work in the 80s, it wasn't gonna work in the fucking 90s, man. I'm not gonna summarize Takaki Ryusei for you, it's kinda boring. None of Gaki Daisho's descendants ever quite reach its heights, except when they deviate from it significantly, which Miyashita knew how to do better than perhaps anyone. There is this one manga that I don't know if I should or should not talk about. We'll leave that one for later. For now, let's go back to where we left off in the 70s. Aito Makoto! 1972's Aito Makoto features the return of the ripped school cap, but a significant change in that the main character of this story is a girl. The girl who was in love with the delinquent who wears the school cap. I've seen this described as a romance, but of the 10 chapters available, I haven't seen a single romantic emotion between the two leads. That's not to say this isn't good though. Whether or not they find a way to turn this truly unreasonable relationship into a romance, this is some entertaining shit. The main character is the titular Ai. She's a rich girl who got into a really dumb skiing accident as a kid and was saved by the titular Makoto, whose face was scarred from the rescue. Through being saved though, Ai falls in love with Makoto. Here we see the classic age-old girl falls in love with guy because he saved her thing, which we actually kinda see in Gaki Daisho too, with Mankichi saving a girl named Tomoko who becomes his de facto girlfriend afterwards. But back to Ai and Makoto. Makoto, despite his resemblance to our heroic boys, is a complete villain. His manhood is shaped such that he can easily acquire lackeys at this new, rich private school, but only to the extent that he can corrupt them and use them for his villainous deeds. He's like a modern-day version of, he's like a 1970s version of Adolf Hitler. Once again, I'm not joking. He views his own plots and schemes to destroy the school from the inside out as resembling Hitler's rise to power. Unlike our former heroes who used sports to channel their anger and frustration, Makoto makes a mockery out of the sports clubs at his school. He fools the boxing club and the rugby club with his cunning, Hitler-like mind, as well as his natural aptitude for athleticism that seems to accompany every manga delinquent. It's as if Makoto is not only trying to tear apart his own school, but also whatever tropes or trends had existed in delinquent manga up to that point, if delinquent manga even existed as a category at that point. I could have put this in the lineage of Gaki Daisho for the sole reason that it contains a delinquent boy who seeks to take over a space with his charisma and strength, but this story has different enough aims and scope that I would rather talk about this separately. Makoto's complete disregard for honorable behavior is visible most of all in his treatment of Ai. He wouldn't be able to do any of this if Ai didn't feel so indebted to him for saving her life. Because Makoto saved her, he got a permanent scar on his face, and he lost a lot more afterwards. So Ai feels a need to make it all up to him. To the great detriment of her reputation and her well-being, she serves him as a repayment for her life. Her actions, her principles, her conviction, if they were committed by a man, would certainly be called manhood. And in a way, that's kinda how she's framed here, as a woman whose manhood puts Makoto's to shame. A huge part of what constitutes manhood in these manga and in many other Japanese stories is a sense of duty and a dedication to that duty despite whatever toll it may take on your body, despite whatever reason or common sense may say. Ai's selfless servitude to this young Hitler, despite the trouble and misery that it causes her, is determined by the story to be honorable behavior. The damage she suffers to her reputation mirrors the damage that previous manga characters would suffer to their bodies, and she withstands this prolonged, torturous damage because of her sense of duty. Only having about 10 chapters at our disposal, there's not really much more that I can say. Wikipedia has a summary of events and apparently Makoto ends up at a delinquent high school somehow. My impression is that it's kinda like the one from Yu Yakebancho, but there's no way for me to confirm. High Teen Boogie! Another romance delinquent manga from the 70s with a female main character is High Teen Boogie. I'm really bad at segues, and also this has a male main character too. There's two main characters. This story is about a romance between a biker gang leader, Fujimaru, and a very studious girl, Momoko. You can see the parallels between this and Aito Makoto instantly. As a matter of fact, the whole delinquent guy and studious girl romance is something that persists in delinquent manga well into the 2010s. Notably, the Fujimaru is a member of a biker gang, or a Bosozoku as they're called in Japan. This is the earliest manga I could find with Number 1, a Bosozoku main character. Number 2, a delinquent main character wearing a regent hairstyle. And Number 3, the main character having this style of personality? How do I even word this? Let me explain. Fujimaru has a sort of carefree personality that I haven't seen in the main characters of any previous delinquent manga, though don't take that to mean that it hasn't been done before at all. Fujimaru's laid back, but not in a sloppy country bumpkin kind of way, no. This guy's a ladies' man. He's very popular with women in a way that none of the characters I've discussed previously are. Now is a good time to introduce the Koha Nanpa spectrum. I was introduced to these words from the book Kamikaze Biker, Parody and Anime in Affluent Japan by Ikuya Sato, a sociology book that examines the phenomenon of Japanese delinquency, specifically Bosozoku delinquency. I'll paraphrase here, but I'm also going to be adding some of my own ideas that I've acquired over the last several months of this lunacy. A Koha is a man of character, a man amongst men. The kind of guy delinquents imagine themselves to be, or strive to be. Disciplined, self-controlled, imbued with a samurai spirit. Almost heroic, but not quite. Unconcerned with women's affection and yet perfectly capable of both protecting and thus attracting women. Despite the fact that he rejects society's rules, he still makes his own code that he lives by. A nanpa is a playboy, but in a delinquent context, it just means a guy who can't keep his dick in his pants and can't stop huffing paint thinner. If girls, or really any vice at all, distract you from your purpose, then you are a nanpa. For Bosozoku, the purpose is always to ride, and therefore any distraction from riding makes a guy a nanpa, rather than the honorable Koha Bosozoku who rides no matter what, and disregards women. A Koha is the guy real-life delinquents think they are. A nanpa is the guy they tend to actually be. I don't want to reduce every character we talk about to this binary, which is why I call it a spectrum, but even as a spectrum, it's still reductive. But by mapping characters onto it, we can maybe understand the meaning a little bit better. A guy like Tora, who has little self-control, can be put closer to the nanpa side, but not quite all the way. He does still have a strong, manly sense of duty. A guy like Skullcap Masa, who is a mountain of self-control, is very far along the Koha side. Jotaro Kujo is even more of a Koha because he is such an unshakable ball of masculinity that he barely even smiles. Someone like Mankichi would fall in the middle because while he doesn't pursue women, he is very much in love with Tomoko. Fujimaru of High Teen Boogie very much pursues the female lead, but he does have a strong sense of responsibility that makes me want to put him somewhere closer to the middle. Still, closer to Nanpa than Mankichi is. The main character of this next manga is a little harder to place. Also, strap yourselves in because we are entering the 80s, which technically we already did before on that tangent I went on, but forget that. And by extension, entering the world of Bosozoku. Kinda. There's still a lot of delinquent manga that's not Bosozoku in the 80s, but bro, come on. Shonan Bakusozoku. Shonan Bakusozoku is about Yosuke Eguchi, leader of the Bosozoku gang known as the Shonan Bombers. He's also part of a school club, but curiously, not a sports club. He's the president of the Handicrafts Club, that's his #1 passion, but his natural skill on the bike had him scouted by the previous generation of the Shonan Bombers, literally begging him to take over as the leader. Yosuke is devilishly skilled with a motorcycle, and it's a good thing too. Being poor on a bike would be unmanly for a Bosozoku. Just as a man must control his body and his self even under the most extreme conditions, so too must he control this metal extension of himself. For a Bosozoku, poor control over his bike or his car is considered childish. Of course, Boso driving itself is also considered childish, but in a different way that we'll get into later. Alright kids, let's get our vocabulary in order. Bosozoku is a word used to describe a specific subculture of motor enthusiast gangs that arose in the 60s and 70s. It involves a lot of modifying bikes and cars, often illegally, and not for the sake of improving performance or anything, but really just to make them look cool. Look at this cock exhaust. That's a real Bosozoku, in real life. As you can see, these gangs really prioritize the aesthetic over everything else. Every Saturday night, and sometimes other days, but mostly just Saturday night, they would do organized driving through the longest and most crowded streets in their city, specifically because they wanted to be seen and noticed. Their outrageous vehicles, obnoxious to sight, sound, and sensibility. Their flashy clothes, either a Western-style leather jacket and jeans like we see here and in High Teen Boogie, or more commonly, the tokofuku, the uniform of the kamikaze pilots. It actually doesn't look that similar to what kamikaze pilots really wore, but ignore that. Their blatant disregard for traffic laws that often got themselves and others killed. You may notice that these guys bear no resemblance to the motorcycle gangs we have here in America. Okay, maybe they resemble each other a bit, like aesthetically, but I promise, bro, like they're literally like nothing alike, bro. Just listen, just wait. That's because Bosozoku aren't organized criminals. I mean, they're organized in the sense that they operate like military units, complete with guard squads and attack squads, and all kinds of shit like that. They develop strategies for driving to prevent themselves from getting caught by the cops. They enforce rigid discipline among their ranks, but none of it is profitable. This isn't for the purpose of dealing drugs or guns, any of that Sons of Anarchy type shit. If anything, this is a money sink. These guys have to work part-time jobs to afford this expensive-ass hobby. Look at these graphs, man. Look how much fucking money they're spending on this shit. Unlike the gangs we understand, Bosozoku actually like getting pursued by the cops. They're not trying to be discreet about anything. Why? Because it's fun. That's what they do this for. Fun. These guys are basically playing GTA in real life. They're actively trying to get their wanted level up, but of course, they do try to evade capture because they don't want to get caught and sent to juvie. The Shonen Bokusozoku manga started publishing in 1982, which was around the final year of the peak of Bosozoku in Japan. That same year, legislation would be passed and then heavily enforced, which would deal a massive blow to their numbers. Only 2 years later, in 1984, Bosozoku gangs would see their numbers halved on average. My fault, I meant to say over the course of the 4 years between 1980 and 1983. So from 1980 to 1983, the participants in Bosozoku had decreased by half. The trend would continue, but you wouldn't know that by the output of Bosozoku manga, which continued into the 90s and even the 2000s. We'll get deeper into the psychology and history of Bosozoku gangs later in the video. I don't want to backload an entire sociology book's worth of information on you guys. Now, with this knowledge, let's get back on track. Where were we? Yosuke Eguchi, handicrafts master, captain of the Shonan Bombers. He feels a lot like Fujimaru of High Teen Boogie, doesn't he? Except he's a lot goofier, I guess. He's funny, smooth, handsome, rocks a regent cut, he's popular with women, though this guy does not pursue them. He's a natural leader, great at riding motorcycles, and strong as fuck because this show has some action in it. Yosuke is definitely a Mary Sue type character. He's always on the right side of things and, much like Bugs Bunny, he always comes out on top. His rival, Gonda, is like the Daffy to his Bugs, and as a Daffy Duck rider since birth, you already know who my favorite character is.
And you know the injustice this world allows for the sake of comedy.
Each episode's story progresses in a weird way where things are introduced out of nowhere and then dropped at random. Like, for example, in episode 4, you'd think it would be all about Yosuke trying to get Tsuyama's money back, Tsuyama being the girl who has a crush on him, because he accidentally spent it all and he promised to shave his head if he didn't pay her back. But then we get a detour about a PE exam about swinging on bars, and then we get a whole new story catching up with Yosuke's old friend, which leads into a dramatic story about surfing on a tsunami. By the end of the episode, Tsuyama is neither paid back nor does Yosuke shave his head. Instead, we get one of the most beautiful few minutes I've ever seen in any anime ever, where the silhouettes of Yosuke and Tsuyama walk over Shonan Beach as it turns into evening, and then to night. Tsuyama bares her soul to Yosuke. He doesn't hear it, but it's all okay. Many people will hate the lack of focus here, the stories that don't get resolved, the way things are picked up and dropped like memories you can't quite complete, all swimming around in your head at the same time. The whole anime has no shortage of romance stories, most of them actually having nothing to do with Yosuke and Tsuyama. Tsuyama is very clearly into Yosuke, and Yosuke obviously likes her back, but it's never a will they won't they kind of thing. It's treated as a sweet, unrequited romance that concludes in a way I'd rather you see with your own eyes. My favorite story is the one from episode 10 about an American girl visiting Japan who falls in love with Yosuke. Whereas previous stories would throw obstacles at our main characters to test their manhood, this story throws obstacles at our main character to show us how cool he is. It's not a huge criticism, I still love the show, it's just that if you as an audience member are not sold on Yosuke Eguchi, then this won't land for you. One curious thing about this is how low-key Yosuke's voice actor is. When you read the manga, you probably imagine his voice to be more energetic, but his voice actor takes a very laid-back tone that I think fits very well. There is some speculation that Yosuke inspired Josuke from Part 4, but I haven't been able to confirm that any more than I've been able to confirm the whole Jotaro Masa thing. Weird note, this is the only manga in the entire video from Shonen King, Shonen Gahosha's shonen magazine that got cancelled in 1988. They're most well known for their seinen magazine Young King, which we'll see several manga from in this video. I just thought that was an interesting detail, that one of the most influential delinquent manga ever was serialized in the same magazine that gave us Cyborg 009, Apollo's Song, and the fucking Batman manga. Next on the list is another manga about a pompadour motorcycle rider, J Monogatari, but this one's boring, man. It, like Bakusozaku, tries to sell us on our main character's coolness, but in a darker, more humorless way, which would be fine if it was any good, but it isn't. This is what happens when your main character is completely Koha-pilled but also has no vibes whatsoever, and everyone surrounding him also has no vibes whatsoever. Towards the end there, we get some good action and shit, but overall I am just not compelled at all to talk about this one. Moving on. Bebop High School! This is one of my top 3 favorite manga I read for this video. It's one of the funniest things I've ever read, period. What makes it so funny, you ask? Well, it would be too easy to call it the It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia of shonen manga, but that's honestly what it feels like. No one in this manga is a good person, and even the ones who aren't terrible people never come out on top. It's a very mean-spirited story, mostly episodic in nature, where each chapter brings us new depravities from these demons in human skin. The main characters are 2 guys who I consider to be the dynamic duo of delinquent manga, Hiroshi and Toru. At the start, they're basically the same character, but as the story goes on, the differences between them get more pronounced. One thing that never changes, though, is how irredeemably horny, stupid, and violent they are. In that order. First and foremost, these guys wanna fuck. Second and second-most, these guys fail and have to repeat the second year of high school in the first volume? Third and third-most, these guys are not shy about fighting dirty. While you will get moments of them being virtuous, the story will never try to convince you that these guys aren't scumbags. I think both of the available live-action adaptations come to the wrong conclusion, with them fighting honorably against a gang of delinquents even more villainous than they are to save the day or to save the girls or whatever. It's kinda bullshit, I'm not gonna lie. Hiroshi and Toru are not about saving the day, at least as far as I've read. One of the main things I love about Bebop High School is how it doesn't shy away from the fact that delinquents are bullies, often very cruel bullies. If you start reading the manga, right away you'll notice that this is among the most vulgar translations ever made. Nary a page goes by without a faggot, or a cunt, or a douchefag, or a faglord in there somewhere. Most of these are liberties taken by the translator. Hokuto no Gun, you thought you saw the last of them?
No! Never!
Not.
I asked the guy in charge and he said it's mostly localization. I was in a bit more of an edgy phase back then and also trying to replicate how teenage shitheads would talk to each other, while also being creative. And it does work for that purpose. You can't really sell how vulgar Hiroshi and Toru are in English without using that kind of language, because Japanese doesn't really have swear words the way we do. Each chapter is about these guys doing one of the following: trying to fuck bitches, pissing off teachers, harassing classmates, trying to fuck bitches, fighting guys from rival schools, playing pranks on people, trying to fuck bitches. I say trying because these guys try a lot, but they mostly fail. In the times they do succeed, that success usually results in an STD or something. There's a lot of jokes about sexual violence here. Either the characters themselves making the jokes, or entire chapters being setups for sexual violence gags. This is what I mean by these guys are bad people. Here we see Hiroshi and Toru talking to Shingo, a delinquent in town known for his ability to successfully woo women. He fucks bad bitches and ugly bitches alike. The story also implies he's a rapist when he calls himself the sex gangster and Toru says he's more like the sex 731er. I'm not even gonna explain that joke, man, it's that bad. I laughed! I admit it, I laughed! I'm sorry, I have brain damage! Drawn Together is one of my favorite cartoons. There's also a chapter where, as a side gag, it's implied that Shingo is a massive pedophile. One of the chapters in this manga, and you will either think this is the most vile piece of garbage ever or the funniest thing in the world, is I decided to remove the section where I just summarized the entire chapter because I didn't feel like editing this many manga panels. Let's be clear, Hiroshi and Toru are sex criminals, but I view them the same way I view Dennis from It's Always Sunny, who is strongly implied to be a rapist. There were tons of live-action movies made based on Bebop High School. I could only find the first one and the 2-episode miniseries they made in 2004. Neither one is very good, especially the one from 2004, which is also set in 2004 and deletes all the 80s-ness out of the story. Look what they did to Junko's hair. It's normal now. And also they add in 2 new characters and try to force a generic final showdown plotline towards the end. The action just doesn't feel as raw as the mangas. That's one thing about Bebop that separates it from pretty much all other delinquent manga. For as outrageous as these personalities are, the action is very realistic. Or by very, I mean surprisingly, comparatively to other manga. Rarely can a single character take out more than one guy, no matter how strong he is. When they are taking on multiple guys, they usually have to like run around and split them up and like kind of fight strategically. Not like in a Hunter x Hunter sort of way, but in a way where like you can tell their cowardliness is playing into their strength. Because yeah, as strong as they are also cowardly, which makes them funnier and makes their fights more entertaining. The 1985 movie isn't terrible, it's super low budget, but it captures well the griminess of Bebop High School. Also, this guy has the Nazi flag in his room. I know the swastika has a different meaning in Japan, and we will get into the manji's symbolism when we get into the politics and imagery of Japanese delinquents, but that's just the Nazi flag. Like, that's just the Nazi flag, that's the Nazi one. Curiously, there's a parody OVA. Yeah, a parody of the comedy manga. It takes all the characters we know and love and puts them into various scenarios in the future. Not like sci-fi future, just like they're older now and they're all salarymen or like working stiffs, you know, they're just older. I found it to be kind of boring. Like, you would think the idea would be interesting, but it's not translated into anything actually funny. For being a parody, it's very unfunny, and none of the scenarios just feel like anything to me. I'm good off that. Alright, let's run through some manga that I don't really care for until we reach something that I actually want to talk about. Also, like, comment, subscribe, put the bell notification on. Oscar Tebu. This one has a trajectory comparable to... Wait, is it comparable or comparable? Let me look it up. Comparable.
Comparable.
Comparable. I know I used that word earlier in this video, and I mispronounced it.
Don't worry, I corrected you.
I'm not going back to re-record.
Don't worry, I corrected.
This one has a trajectory comparable to Otokojuku, in that it started off as a gag manga and then slowly became a martial arts action manga. I didn't really like it as a comedy, and I wasn't very compelled by its action either, although I do love the art style and the mangaka's ambitious vision for the human anatomy. Karatebu as a comedy manga is occasionally funny when it gets gross and freaky with it. Like, one of the first jokes in the manga is the upperclassmen of the karate club hazing the freshmen by forcing them to... That's the best joke in the manga. It's pretty much downhill from there. When it becomes an action manga, it just doesn't do anything for me. I won't tell you not to read it, but I don't know who to recommend it for if you haven't already read the good stuff. It actually contains a lot of tropes that I want to discuss, especially regarding sexual violence, but I'd rather discuss them with a manga that I like more or feel more strongly about, whether that be positive or negative. Shakotan Boogie! Only one chapter of the manga is available of this one, but the entire OVA is available in all its poorly animated glory, complete with one of the most incomprehensible machine translations I've ever seen in my life.
Okay.
This one's about two guys with a funny dynamic. The Kohai who idolizes the senpai but doesn't realize that he does everything better than his senpai, mainly when it comes to pulling women. And the senpai keeps trying to put his Kohai down or put him in his place, or not really put him in his place in like an abusive or like physically demanding way, but more in a sense of like trying to assert his superiority over him by bragging, and the Kohai just buys everything that the senpai brags about. This duo is just as horny as the ones from Bebop High School, and many of their adventures dip their toes into comedic representation of sex crimes. Except this one isn't funny, so it sucks. One thing to note though is that it shows how bosozoku really is a culture. Like, you don't need to be in a gang to be a bosozoku. These guys really are just vehicle enthusiasts, and that culture seems to be very male-centric and horny. We'll get into women's involvement in bosozoku culture a little bit later. Hot Road! The first thing you'll notice about this one is how dreamy and atmospheric it is. It's about a girl with a distant relationship to her mother who falls into a situationship with an asshole bosozoku guy. Probably the prettiest boso rider we've seen up to this point. One thing about shoujo manga with delinquents in them is they always feel the need to pretty them up, and I can't blame them. Normal delinquents are fucking ugly and stinky and unhygienic and overly horny, so you gotta really sand off the edges to make them appealing. I say the girl has a distant relationship with her mother, but really she has a distant relationship to everything. But the manga is dreamlike to a fault. It's difficult sometimes to follow what's going on. Time progresses at a pace arrhythmic, impossible to follow or to keep the beat of. You have a general feeling that you're going forward, but sometimes you question even that. The boundary of this reality is so relaxed that it often neglects to define and contrast the things that it contains. We see pages where the subject of a panel almost unmakes itself before our very eyes. Sometimes the panel itself isn't even there, and it feels like everything is coming undone, as if the world itself couldn't care less. A parent letting their child cross the street on their own. All that is the stuff I like about the story, but it's also what makes it difficult for me to finish. I have not yet refined my strength as an art experiencer to really sit inside this for its full 18 chapters. Yankee Reputai! Yet another lackluster OVA for a manga that could potentially be pretty good, but we'll never know until it's translated into English. The main character of this one, Monnojo, is like the final evolution in the line of Fujimaru and Yosuke, being a Bosozoku leader who is at once a tremendous pervert as well as a man amongst men. Truly a conundrum for the dumbass chart I made earlier. If there's one thing you should watch this anime for, it's the completely incomprehensible action. Ogami Matsugoro! This one didn't even have subtitles. I watched a lot of raw anime and none of them turned out to be good. I wrote out a whole gag where I'd very obviously fabricate the story to this one while it played out in the background, but reading over it, it's not that funny. Apparently the subtitles really do exist, but when I asked the guys who supposedly subtitled it, they gave me a weird-ass response that I do not care to pursue. I don't really think it's worth paying money to rewatch Ogami Matsugoro, but now with subtitles telling me exactly what I already knew they were saying. If you've watched about a dozen or so Japanese dubbed anime, you'll probably get the gist of this, but I wouldn't recommend watching it anyway because it's one of those OVAs from the 80s and 90s that were made entirely to sell copies of the manga. Technically, all anime adaptations of manga are made to sell copies of the manga, but most of them at least attempt to be a decent work of art in the process. Buchigiri! Not to be confused with the 2024 anime of the same name. A sports delinquent manga with only a few chapters available of the manga and one episode available of its OVA, complete with a guy opening it up on his computer in the first few seconds. The main character's attitude, strength, bravery, and perversion remind me of Yusuke Urameshi, and the girl's responses to all that remind me a lot of Keiko. Yu Yu Hakusho showed up about 3 years later, so I wonder if Yoshihiro Togashi took inspiration from this. Of course, this also feels kinda classic, doesn't it? I mean, we've seen variations of this before, in this video. Delinquent guy, studious girl. Hey, this guy looks kinda like me. What's his name? From Harold Sakuishi, creator of Beck Mongolian Chop Squad, we have Gorilla Man. As expected, the manga is nowhere to be found, but the 2-episode OVA is somewhere to be found. On the internet. Yeah, whatever. Why do I go off script? Why do I go off script? As far as low-budget OVA manga adaptations go, this one isn't terrible, if only because it's actually quite funny. It's about a guy who, according to some people, looks like a gorilla. He doesn't talk, he doesn't respond to inquiries, no nodding, shaking his head, smiling, frowning, nothing beyond perhaps a slight change in expression every once in a while. At the start, you'd think he's a soulless husk with no agency to speak of, the way he just goes along with whatever the guys tell him to. Kind of like a golem of sorts. But you can see him get pissed off when the teacher treats him like shit, and he does like to smoke, a lot. And he clearly has moral principles because he saved this girl from getting hit by a motorcycle, and he did it like this. This moment is what made me think of Sakamoto Desuka. This guy's like the proto-Sakamoto. Gorilla Man is the ultimate Koha, a man of extremely few words who lets his actions reflect his morality. Even when the world stands against him, he holds his tongue. Taiman Blues! This is a good opportunity to talk about girl delinquents, otherwise known as Sukabans. I skipped over talking about Skeban Deka because it wasn't very relevant to this video, the same way I'm skipping over Yu Yu Hakusho and shit like that. If you're curious, Skeban Deka is sort of like a delinquent James Bond. Our main character is a super cool girl with a sorrowful past who tracks down juvenile criminals and brings them to justice in order to protect her mother from capital punishment. The manga has a few translated chapters and a fully translated and pretty good OVA. But most notably, it has a super popular live-action series that ended up inspiring a ton of Sukeban action shows, which are basically their own thing that need their own video. Kenny Lauderdale's been doing a series on those. Hana no Asukagumi is perhaps the most notable manga inspired by Skeban Deka. The English translation is incomplete, and the movie adaptation seems to have nothing to do at all with what I read in the manga or saw in the OVA. But it looks amazing. Hana no Asukagumi I compare more to a Sukeban Sailor Moon, with each villain of the week being some delinquent with strange powers that our main character, Asuka, has to take out with a coin. Skeban Deka has a special military-grade yo-yo, but that at least makes sense. A gold coin? Gold isn't even that good of a metal for combat. You ever try using a gold sword in Minecraft? Of course not. You've tried using gold swords, plural, because you need about 5 of them to kill a baby cow. A gold pickaxe? So I can what, mine a single cobblestone? Get fucking real. Okay, back to Taiman Blues. This one is another pretty bad OVA, but at least it has something to do with the subcultures and art trends I set out to analyze. This is an anime about a bunch of Sukabans who start their own biker gang. It's very much a girl power anime that's more about girls having fun than about grappling with the very severe misogyny issues that permeate Bosozoku culture, and that's fine with me. The leader of the ladies' gang, named the Eight Angels, will just challenge a guy to a taimon, the Japanese word for a one-on-one duel, and she'll win with her martial arts knowledge and skill, and through that she earns the right to ride her motorcycle with her sisters through this territory. Apparently this isn't even the real Taimon Blues. It's a spin-off of the original, which I can't find at all. It's kind of ironic how one of the earliest pieces of media that directly centers a female Bosozoku gang is an offshoot of an anime about a male Bosozoku gang, but I can't find the male one and I can find the female one. I guess it does mirror how most female Bosozoku gangs in real life were offshoots of male gangs. These Sukeban gangs were usually formed by the girlfriends of the male Bosozoku and were therefore significantly lower in number. Their gang name would usually just be the name of the guy's gang with ladies on the end, and they would often ride alongside the men. Occasionally though, as we see in Taimon Blues' Ladies' Hand, they start a group all by themselves. Either way, approval of male Bosozoku is pretty low, as we can see in this OVA as well as in the statistics. In Kamikaze Biker, Ikuya Sato studied the real-life Ukyo Rengo, or Ukyo Alliance, which was at one point the biggest Bosozoku unit in the entirety of Kyoto. And also it seems that the Ukyo Rengo was not one of the biggest Bosozoku groups in Kyoto, but the AJK was, which the Ukyo Rengo was a part of, and the leader of the AJK was also the leader of the Ukyo Rengo at the same time. He goes over the results of a questionnaire he gave out to 66 members and former members of the group, asking them how they would respond if their kid told them they wanted to become a Bosozoku. The results are pretty mixed when it comes to their sons. A lot of these guys don't really want their sons to become Bosozoku or follow in their footsteps. But on the daughter scenario,
resounding rejection.
Even for female Bosozoku, there's a strong negative response to the idea of their daughters following in their footsteps. When the ladies are informed of the men's opinions on their participation in Bosozoku, that they're unladylike and that the mere fact that there's a female subsection of the gang is deplorable, they're offended, but they also say that they get it. To quote from the book, female members were offended by the gender stereotype and the discriminatory treatment by male members, but they said that they could understand the boys' negative attitudes towards the Bosozoku girls. When I said to Seiko and Naoko that the boys who disliked Bosozoku girls were a bit self-centered, Seiko answered, "You're right, but I understand how they feel about us. If I was a boy and my girlfriend was a Bosozoku member, I'd feel lousy." Naoko agreed with Seiko. Me too. I wouldn't have a Bosozoku girl as a girlfriend if I was a guy. This is especially ironic when you consider the fact that so many of the guys talking shit about how unwomanly delinquent girls are and how they'd never touch one with a 10-foot pole ended up moving in with and marrying delinquent girls, sometimes even Bosozoku girls. There's a sense I get of the women not knowing how to reconcile their desire to feel ladylike and this notion of what it means to be ladylike with their genuine passion for riding motorcycles. And there's also the sense that the guys don't know how to reconcile their attraction to these women who are not very ladylike according to the standards that they imagine, or the standards that have been ingrained in them.
And finally, we arrive at the glorious year, 1988.
Arsenal was beginning its campaign for its 9th First Division title. That's probably the only other relevant thing that happened that year. And they wouldn't win that trophy until 1989, so forget that actually. The most important thing that happened by far is that 3 legendary delinquent manga would all begin publication that year. 4 if you count Gorilla Man, but we're not able to read that manga right now, so it's just 3. Rokudenashi Blues, Kyokara Orewa, and Bad Boys. They also all ended in 1997. Oh, come on, Bad Boys, you were almost there! I have a lot to say about each of these, and I'll discuss them in that order.
Rokudenashi Blues!
Here's where we gotta get some definitions straight. We've talked about Bosozoku, but we haven't really talked about Yankees. The best way to illustrate this is by a Venn diagram. Yankee is just another youth subculture in Japan, one that spanned broader than Bosozoku probably because it didn't necessitate getting into an expensive-ass hobby. Aesthetically, dyed hair, punch perms, and especially the ducktail cut were all a part of the male Yankee look. Sometimes these guys would shave their eyebrows off too to look tougher. Activities for non-Bosozoku Yankees pretty much entirely revolve around hanging out and looking for things to do to pass the time. Usually this would end up being underage drinking, smoking, huffing paint thinner, and walking around town looking for fights with other Yankees. Now, you could technically adopt the Yankee aesthetics and not be a delinquent, but it was very rare. These aesthetics were strongly associated with violence and criminality. You wouldn't want to look like this unless you wanted people to treat you like that. In a way, adopting the aesthetics of a Yankee is what you do only if you want to start getting into fights. Clothing and hairstyles have important roles in inciting fights among Yankees. Short, permanent waves seem to signify, I will take up the gauntlet at any time, especially when combined with certain styles of clothing.
The permanent wave is the sign of fighting. No surfers dare fight.
If two men who have perms encounter each other, that means they are ready to fight. Those who have perms have pride. a pride which can be stated as, I don't want to be seen as a sissy. Generally, young guys who wanted to be stylish but didn't want to get stared down by other Yankees every time they hit downtown would instead get into a surfer style. I say young guys and youth because it was damn near impossible to find anyone older than 20 with a regent cut and shaved eyebrows. This is something you had to graduate from. All Yankees are delinquents, not all delinquents are Yankees. All Bosozoku are Yankees, but not all Yankees are Bosozoku. Why did I choose to do this at the beginning of Rokuden Ashi Blues? Well, it's like the 10th manga we've covered that has a main character with a regent cut, and I figured now is as good a time as any to get through that lesson. Anyways, Rokuden Ashi Blues is about a guy named Maeda Tyson, named after Mike Tyson, whom the main character idolizes. His dream is to be a world champion boxer. He's naturally very strong and good in a brawl, but his skills in the ring leave much to be desired. We begin on the first day of school, where Tyson notices that the girls don't wear sailor uniforms anymore, and he gets so mad that he grabs a random girl and demands her to strip naked. Upon his return from suspension, Tyson ends up being forced to display his strength by putting some guys in line, which makes him the de facto bancho of the whole school, whether he wants the title or not. And notably, he does not. It's way more common for main characters of delinquent manga, at least in this era, to end up as bancho as a matter of circumstance rather than to actively seek that title. This is true even in real life, where according to the other sociology book I read, Heritage of Endurance, one of the guys they interviewed said he didn't even know he was a bancho. He just turned out that way due to a combination of his strength and his popularity among the guys because, according to himself and his friends, he never really started shit with anyone. We can tell that a bancho isn't just a guy who's strong. You need to be charismatic as well, which is something we've seen in the past manga. Back to Rokuden Ashi Blues, according to Tyson's friends, he isn't even really a delinquent, he's just stupid. He has a dream of becoming a world heavyweight boxing champion, but he doesn't even know he needs a license to box, or that he's underage for the license. The only reason he turns out to be a delinquent is that he, number 1, has a regent cut, and number 2, has very strong moral principles that he frequently feels the need to enforce through violence. The second one causes people to eventually start respecting him and treating him as a leader. Tyson's actually a huge softie. He cries easily, he's true to his own emotions, he stands on business. Even if he hates you, he'll put his well-being on the line to save you, and to protect your honor. This guy can't help but defend people's honor. While he's rough around the edges and has trouble controlling his emotions and remaining composed like a classic Koha, he is still a man amongst men, and a more likable man amongst men than many other men who are men amongst other men. Huh? Actually, at first, Tyson might be a bit unlikable because it really feels like he's strong-arming his simpleton morals onto every situation. And because he's unbeatably strong, the story always sides with his morals. But after a few volumes, the mangaka figures out the perfect balance to really sell you on his world. His unique sense of humor, his impeccable pacing, his truly stellar talent for facial expressions. You'll notice the art style on screen is very unique. These characters' faces sell you on every emotion they feel. When it's an action story, the action is poetic and almighty. Huh? Wait! When it's a drama story, well, let me put it this way. Rokuden Ashi means good for nothing in Japanese. Good for nothing blues. It is perhaps the most fitting name for any manga in this entire video. I get the impression Morita is a romantic, not necessarily in terms of this kind of romance, but in terms of romanticizing his subjects. He paints a picture of a bunch of guys who really are good for nothing. A bunch of hopeless guys who don't know any better than to throw a punch when their hands compel them to. And it is, too, a bluesy manga. Most of the music assigned to delinquents in the 80s is that 50s style bluesy rock and roll, sometimes a little bit punkier like with the Blue Hearts. Usually it's either that or city pop, and Rokuden Ashi Blues sits firmly in the former's camp. The 1992 OVA clearly did not get the message. The 1993 movie got it a little better with its ending, but whatever. If Bebop High School is the It's Always Sunny of delinquent manga, then Rokuden Ashi Blues is kinda like the Community of delinquent manga. Those are like the only 2 TV shows I like. Now for the criticisms. You can view this panel right here either in an endearing way, if you see Tyson as a total idiot who is well-meaning, or in a frustrating way, if you see the story as agreeing with Tyson's idiocy, implying that his simplistic and often conservative philosophy should be agreeable. Your mileage with this manga will vary based on how much charitability you're willing to give its main character. I've lost count of the amount of times I've seen a damsel in distress plot in a delinquent manga, and we aren't even halfway through all of the delinquent manga. Either a girl a main character has a crush on is getting harassed by bad delinquents delinquents on the street, or the girl is deliberately targeted and kidnapped by the bad delinquents either to hurt the main character or to lure him out for an ambush. I'm not here to reconstruct.
Reconstruct? I wrote deconstruct in the script. Why did I say that? How did I not catch this, man? What the fuck?
The damsel in distress trope for you guys, and Rokudenashi Blues isn't even the worst offender of this trope in the whole video. We'll get to the worst offenders, and I'm also not saying that the damsel in distress story should never be used. I'm just saying that it's often not used very creatively in these manga, and Rokudenashi Blues is no exception. Also, remember the girl Tyson accosted and sexually harassed at the beginning? That same girl, Chiaki, goes on to fall in love with Tyson, despite his verbal abuses. This is what I mean when I say the early manga is a bit hard to get through. Over time though, their relationship does reach a point that I would call nice. Yeah, I would call it that if Chiaki didn't get kidnapped twice in the span of 50 chapters. Also, the constant misunderstandings where whenever Chiaki so much as sees Tyson within a 5-foot radius of another girl, she runs away crying thinking that he's cheating on her. And somehow, Tyson's at fault in this one? I like Chiaki, okay? I just think it's played. I think it's played! I really wish this one was fully translated. Being the way it is, I just don't feel very motivated to finish it. I've finished way longer manga that I like less because they're fully available. The only reason I don't fully catch up to the translation is that I don't like to leave things unfinished. It's also why I rarely ever read manga that's currently serializing. What the fuck do I look like waiting a whole last week for a chapter to drop? I realized that I fully caught up with Bebop High School's translation, but that's just because I really liked it, and I didn't notice that I was all caught up until I really was all caught up.
Kyokara Orewa!
I watched the OVA for this one in senior year of high school, and it's probably the first work of art to deal directly with Japanese delinquency that I've ever seen. I always wondered why this anime felt so much like Yu Yu Hakusho, and it turns out it's directed by Takashi Mori, who storyboarded Yu Yu Hakusho and Rurouni Kenshin and Gunsmith Cats and Otaku no Video. Kazuya Tsurumaki, Katsuichi Nakayama, and Saito Tetsuhito were all key animators on this thing too. I'm not pretending I knew who these guys were beforehand, I just looked it up and some really talented people got their hands all over this. Looking at it further, even the OVAs that I think look terrible have staff members who would go on to do great work in the future. Which shows us that when an anime sucks and looks like shit, it's rarely the animator's fault. What I wanted to get at with all this is that, visually, this outclasses every other delinquent anime adaptation, unless we count fucking Akira, and I guess Shonan Bakusozaku is up there too. By the time I hit winter break of senior year of high school, I'd already watched close to 400 anime, and my top 10 hadn't changed in that entire time. Then I watched Kyokara Orewa, and it was time for Trigun to go. For the record, I don't actually care that much about top rankings or whatever, this is all just symbolic. You flag things as your favorites not only based on your emotions towards a work of art, but also because of what you want to tell other people about yourself. I love Kyokara Orewa and Trigun equally, but I decided to put the one that I felt represented my identity in relation to anime more accurately. It's like I'm proclaiming, I see more of myself in Kyokara Orewa than I do in Trigun. I have more to say about Kyokara Orewa than I do about Trigun. Which may have been more true in high school, but now, having watched so many Western movies and read so many Western books, it might be the other way around, but I'll just have to see. A part of that is also how I want to be perceived. Like, do I want to be seen as the kind of guy who likes all the popular stuff? Because I do. I do like the popular stuff. But I also want people to know that I, specifically, like the stuff that not as many people know. Over time, though, that part of my personality has faded. A lot of the lines and distinctions and categories that I used to put things into have faded to the point where now, when I go through life, instead of feeling like I'm walking down hallways of information, I feel like I'm swimming in information. I don't really know how to concretely classify things the way I used to. This is part of what scares me about the AI onslaught on knowledge, passion, and creation. So much of what I know comes from the internet, but also from books that I acquire in person. What if there comes a day when even material reality is changed by AI? Kyokara Orewa is another delinquent manga about a dynamic duo, one that rivals Bebop's Hiroshi and Toru both in their relevance and in their funniness. Both manga received OVA and live-action adaptations, both close to their release and several decades after.
I meant to say the live-action releases were both close to their original manga release and later on, a few decades later, whereas the OVAs were just like in the 90s rather.
These are two of the most fondly remembered delinquent manga of all time. Of the two anime adaptations, I'd say Kyokara Orewa takes the cake, but of the original manga, Bebop wins out. Keikao is about Mitsuhashi, the blonde one, and Ito, the spiky hair one, who both transfer to a new high school on the same day. They also, on the same day, spontaneously decide to reinvent their image and become delinquents. Ito very clearly models his behavior after the Koha archetype. He doesn't say the word Koha, at least not to my memory, and as a matter of fact, I don't remember anyone saying the word Koha in any of the anime or movies that I've watched. But he does talk a lot about honor, and he does stand on business when it comes to being honorable. He's strong enough to back his ideals up in a fight. He will protect the weak. He will honor the rules of a one-on-one duel, a taiman if you will, and he will protect his woman. Mitsuhashi is a criminal. He has no morals to speak of. He's a womanizer, he fights dirty, he uses people as pawns in his plans, he abuses animals, he attempts murder. There are very few crimes he seems unwilling to commit. He will resort to kidnapping a random child just to convince people at school that he's a foreigner so he won't have to dye his hair back to black. And then he'll leave her in a cardboard box in the middle of nowhere and try to frame Ito as the perpetrator. Anytime he starts to show a shred of honor, he throws it away. But then, every time you start to think he's a heartless psychopath, he will redeem about 1% of his soul. While I love Ito and Mitsuhashi equally, there is no story without the latter. This guy is the lifeblood of the story. Even Mitsuhashi's prospective love interest is more interesting than Ito's long-term girlfriend. Ito and Kyoko have a relationship that's pretty standard for a high school delinquent manga. Kyoko is very normal outside of her Sukeban past, and she falls in love with Ito after he saves her from being kidnapped, which is pretty standard. They're really not much to look at. Mitsuhashi and Riko, on the other hand, are a tag team comedy duo on their own. Mitsuhashi and Ito are the main comedy duo. And the second best comedy duo is Mitsuhashi and another character entirely. They both sort of tsundere on each other. Riko sees something in the moral failure that is Mitsuhashi. Maybe she thinks she can fix him, but I don't think she wants to. I think she's attracted to Mitsuhashi's conniving ways. While Riko is more honest about her feelings and more willing to confess to Mitsuhashi, his repulsive personality constantly prevents her. And there's not even an opportunity for him to save her from distress because she's a martial arts master who beats the shit out of anybody who tries to fuck with her. So we don't have the damsel in distress shortcut to romance that Ito and Kyoko did and that most delinquents and their girlfriends have. The only way for Mitsuhashi and Riko to get together is the old-fashioned way, to admit their feelings for each other. And it's very doubtful whether Mitsuhashi has any human feelings whatsoever. I'd say he's more of a lizard than a human being. He's a mischievous imp.
I meant to say mischievous. I've been mispronouncing this word my whole life, I guess, and nobody told me.
The archetypal jester. He is the plotting, scheming, Shakespearean villain like Aaron or Don John, where his sole motivation is that he derives pleasure from other people's pain. Man, look at this Tom and Jerry ass shit.
Koi koi. Sa koi.
Kyokara Orewa is funny without being as offensive as Bebop High School or as moralizing as Rokudenashi Blues. Off the top of my head, I can't think of anything to keep me from recommending the OVA to everybody, and the manga to everybody who enjoyed the OVA. The 10-episode anime obviously only covers a few arcs of this 366-chapter manga, and I'll tell you one thing, this manga fits a lot of jokes into each of its chapters. It really feels like a 500-chapter manga. But regardless, the anime could only cover a few arcs, and it chooses some of the best. Now, I'm totally open to being wrong on this, but as far as I can tell, Kyokara Orewa and Rokudenashi Blues are both candidates for the first field trip arc in delinquent manga history. The field trip is an essential arc in a lot of delinquent stories, and the only delinquent manga that came before it that I can think it would have happened in is Bebop High School, and that's only if it happened in the untranslated parts that I haven't read yet. The fact that both of these manga thought to include a field trip around the same time tells me that they probably got the idea from something earlier. If not another delinquent manga, then probably some other kind of school story. Maybe the field trip arc has been a trend for a long-ass time in Japanese stories and I just don't know any better. But how these field trips work in delinquent stories is very unique to them. Generally, the field trip is to Kyoto, and when they arrive, there's some kind of conflict between our main characters and the delinquents of another school. If not Kyoto delinquents, then delinquents from a school that's on a field trip to Kyoto. So ubiquitous is this trope that it's the entire premise of the Kenka Bancho PSP game, which I played for this video. It's an interesting game where you play as a bancho on your school's Kyoto field trip and you go around staring down other delinquents and beating the shit out of other banchos who are also on the field trip. The banchos you defeat become subservient to you, and their underlings become your underlings. We see a return to the man amongst men idea because that's kind of the guy your character is, and the measure of his manhood is how many men he can conquer. According to the rules of the fight, of course. This is what my character looked like. In Keikao, Mitsuhashi and Ito are the dual banchos of their school. But they only get that way because they were challenged by the delinquents who were already there, and they were forced to beat the shit out of them. It's not really a delinquent school, it's just a school with a few delinquents in it. So they really don't have underlings, and they don't really spend much time bullying their classmates either. Gone are the days when guys would set out to conquer other banchos and gangs and try to increase the numbers of their army. The banchos of these manga are pretty laid back and seem content with the power they already have. You remember what I said about this being these guys' first go at being delinquents? Turns out these guys are naturals. Before I first watched the anime, I thought the story would be about the struggles of fitting into the role of a delinquent, or perhaps a criticism of the mentality of delinquents through comedy, or something along those lines, but it's not. This is a pretty played straight delinquent story. These guys have a natural talent for delinquency. A few volumes in, and the story treats them like they've been delinquents the whole time. Mitsuhashi and Ito are so naturally strong at fighting that they can take on very experienced and dangerous delinquents one-on-one with no training whatsoever. Being strong in a fight seems to be a requirement to be the main character of a delinquent manga, even if action isn't the focus. That said, the action can sometimes detract from some of the stories in Keikao, especially in the manga where it gets a little bit more repetitive towards the end. There's always a bad delinquent treating one of our friends like shit and who needs to be taken care of, so we have to take time off from the jokes and the gags to deal with them. I'm not complaining too much, the fights aren't bad in the anime, but as you can see from the manga, action is not Hiroyuki Nishimori's strong suit. Comedy is. You'll see me say that for a lot of the manga on this list, actually. I swear I'm not a hater of action or drama stories, that would be fucking ridiculous. I'm just saying that a Japanese delinquent framing for stories lends itself better to comedy than it does to action. I know it sounds weird to say that considering the majority of delinquent stories are action stories too, but the best ones tend to put in a little bit more effort than making their villains some generic bad guy. So many delinquent stories opt for antagonists that are also delinquents but they're bad, so the main character has a moral reason to fight them. Why do delinquents need a moral reason to fight? They're delinquents. The only reason they need should be that one guy looked at the other guy the wrong way, which is obviously not the most riveting motivation for a story, but Bebop High School understood this, and managed to frame the opponents of Hiroshi and Toru as guys whose defeat is imperative while at the same time refraining from turning the two into heroes. My complaint about the bad delinquent trope boils down to this. These guys are generic, nondescript bad guys who are only ever defeated by punching them harder, never through any strategic or interesting or novel means. Basically turning whatever story they're a part of into a very boring action story no matter how well drawn the action is. I say this now because I will complain about the bad delinquent trope more in the future of this video. It is a trope, and therefore is not inherently bad. It can be done well, and in infinite ways, because art has no rules. To me, Crows, a manga we'll get into a little bit later, does it well because while the characters have a moral imperative to fight their enemies, the enemies actually feel like real people. Keikao does the same to some extent with Nakano and Satoshi, but for the most part, its bad delinquents are pretty boring. This is totally fine though, because for most of the story, we're not dealing with this boring-ass dynamic, we're dealing with very funny jokes. So when it does descend to this level, I never feel like complaining too much. And even when Keikao does do this shit, it still sometimes finds a way to make the fights themselves funny. In the stories that this trope is such a massive part of, it feels lazy, uninspired, boring, unchallenging. I was wondering if I should put this section here or in a later section where the good delinquent versus bad delinquent trope is more prevalent and more worthy of criticism, but I decided I'd put this here for clarity's sake so you guys know that I'm not really complaining that much about Kyokara Orewa. It's just that this is one of the earlier manga where I really feel this sense of good delinquent versus bad delinquent as a very shallow storytelling method. And Kyokara Orewa is not necessarily the originator of this trope. We see elements of this all the way back to the 60s, like in Gaki Daisho and Yuyake Bancho, which have delinquents that are of worse moral character than our main character. Bro, I'm editing now. Why do I sound so serious in this section? I'm talking like I'm fucking, like I have a gun pointed to my head by the fucking Kyokara Orewa lobby, dude. Like, I swear, Kyokara Orewa is it's a good anime. Yeah. And they're telling me not to call it Keikao anymore. They're like, stop saying that. Oh man, the Kyokara Orewa is too many syllables. It's too many syllables. It really is. It's a lot of syllables. So Keikao is what I 2 syllables, a lot easier. And also it's a good anime, good manga. I sound like I'm so stressed out, man. Nishimori obviously wants our guys to be heroes, and that's the case for a lot of delinquent manga here. Delinquents themselves love to envision themselves as a sort of roguish hero, a picaro, a man on the fringes of society who operates by his moral code, which is superior to the moral code of the laws that guide nations and cities. But honestly, very rarely is it that I'm sold on the picaresque nature of a delinquent main character. I love Ito and Mitsuhashi, but I love them more as a comedy duo than I do as heroes.
But I also want to make it clear that Ito and Mitsuhashi as a comedy duo are inseparable from Ito and Mitsuhashi as a sort of delinquent crime-fighting unit, right? Like, as much as I prefer the comedy to the comedy and the action are kind of inseparable. Without the action, without fighting all those bad delinquents, Kyokaro Orewa wouldn't be what it is. I just want to make that clear.
The main reason for that is just the antagonist having very weak characters. I'm serious when I say it's nothing more than a one-dimensional bad guy, and Ito and Mitsuhashi have to beat the shit out of him. Mitsuhashi and Ito are a dynamic duo. They deserve dynamic antagonists. Barring that, you just gotta accept that Japanese delinquents will struggle to be heroes. If one thing has been made clear in my research, Japanese kids don't turn to this brand of delinquency for any necessary reasons. Here in America and in most places in the world, kids become delinquents because of socioeconomic conditions that leave them no other option. In Japan, the reason for delinquency tends to just be ennui. Disillusionment is the word thrown around a lot to describe these guys. These guys are listless. Everything that can entertain or occupy a normal kid's mind just doesn't work for them. They need something more, so they go out and find whatever little morsels of action they can in the world. And they can often find themselves doing very morally reprehensible things. Now obviously that won't fly in a story like Kyokaro Orewa, and it doesn't need to. The scope of Kyokaro Orewa is not in examining the nature of delinquency, although it does inadvertently comment on those things. I just think it's important to note that real-life factors inform the stories that we're talking about here, so I can illustrate to you exactly why I'm not sold on so many of the story arcs in delinquent manga. The funniest character in the entire story is Imai of Benny High School. This guy's probably my favorite guy. My favorite character used to be a tie between Mitsuhashi and Imai. That is, until I found this image of him playing my favorite guitar of all time, the Fernandez Nomad. Bad boys! So we've arrived at this manga. Let me bury the lead a little bit, okay? I mean, I've been doing that the entire video, but let me really do that here. If you're like me, then you saw the cover art for this manga and rejoiced. This looks phenomenal. Hiroshi Tanaka is a mangaka with a very strong sense of style. These are some of the most uniquely stylistic illustrations I've ever seen in my manga reading career, which to be fair kind of began at the start of this video. I haven't read that much manga before starting this video, I was mostly an anime guy. Bad Boys starts off with a bang. Our main character, Kiriki Tsukasa, is a rich boy living a stifled life in his mansion. He gets boners easily and really wants to fuck his homeschool teacher. One day, this teacher tells him he needs to stop being such a pathetic loser and become a real man. She suggests he become a delinquent and promises him that if he succeeds at becoming a man, she'll take his virginity. Hey, where were these teachers when I was a kid? Honestly, this premise works for me. I can easily understand why Tsukasa would so desperately want to hurry up and become a man. There's a lot of potential here for discussing these kinds of themes. Juvenile delinquency in relation to coming of age, gender, sex, sexuality. Not saying it has to discuss all these things necessarily, but I'm just highlighting the avenues it could go down. So Tsukasa escapes his mansion, and his controlling parents grasp, and he heads out into the world. He meets the retired 18-year-old Bosozoku guys Yoji, Eiji, and Hisao, and they all try to teach him how to become a man. Every attempt seems to be thwarted by his chronic boner syndrome. Still, Tsukasa's youthful vigor inspires these retired delinquents to once more take up the Tokofuku and ride under his banner. So far, it's just a gag comedy, which I'm fine with, a lot of fart jokes and beating up ugly women. Eventually, Tsukasa meets a girl who's actually his age. They hit it off, and all of a sudden, this takes a turn from being a normal delinquent gag comedy to being something more dramatic. Turns out, the homeschool teacher actually got Tsukasa out of the house because she's plotting on his family's wealth, plotting with another man. Tsukasa's parents are apparently involved in illicit dealings and have to hurry out of the country. The stakes have risen! The situation is— Oh, it's over. Yeah, that whole plot thread gets unceremoniously tossed aside. But that's fine. There's plenty of stories that we all love that change their scope from how they were at the beginning. A story changing its goals and aims is not necessarily a bad thing. Eventually, Tsukasa becomes the next generation head of a Bosozoku gang called Gokurakucho. Yeah, Bosozoku gangs operate in generations, where the previous head retires and leaves the gang in the care of his successor. That's why Bosozoku is explicitly a juvenile delinquent thing and doesn't carry over into adulthood the way biker gangs do over here. A big part of that is how the Japanese legal system tries minors versus adults. As bad as juvenile prison is, the sentences are way more lenient on young people for crimes like organized driving, fighting, and disturbing the peace. Your anonymity is also protected as a juvenile. As an adult, the legal punishment for getting caught doing this kind of stuff is way worse, and the social punishment might even be worse than that. This also extends into the behavior of Bosozoku themselves. While there is a great deal of respect for seniority, and seniors who've graduated are treated with the utmost respect, the graduates must have fully given up on Bosozoku to earn that respect. So much as riding a motorcycle after the age of 18 is viewed as childish. At that point, you should have a car. Anyways, Bad Boys has abandoned its initial plotline in favor of something new. So what's next for Kiriki Tsukasa and his friends? What's next? What's next? Okay, I feel like I've earned the right to be a hater here. Some of you might think I'm a hater because of my Fear and Hunger video, but that wasn't me hating. If anything, that was me loving. I was loving the Fear and Hunger games. I'm going to indulge myself here. Please, allow me to indulge myself here, because I'm going crazy. I really got my hopes up for a good story, and I think of myself as a pretty open-minded guy, but my disappointment is immeasurable. Where do I begin? Bad Boys seems to be a story about coincidence, seeing how many of the stories in it are dictated by the hands of fate more than they are by the hands of its characters. I'm not entirely opposed to this. You can have coincidences in your story. You can even have coincidences that push the story forward, that are a major part of the story's themes. I would even go as far as to say every story is about coincidences. You can't have a story without coincidences. So what do I mean when I'm complaining about Bad Boys coincidences? In Bad Boys, coincidences happen because it's easier to progress a story by a series of coincidences than it is to progress it by having your characters actually do things. Because Bad Boys doesn't really have characters. It has approximations of characters, but not necessarily characters that you can believe are real people. And it all comes down to framing. Hiroshi Tanaka is very uninterested in the circumstances regarding the coincidences he writes about. In the Revenge arc, an important message coincidentally survives a very severe fire that burned pretty much everything else in the house. It burned everything in the safe except this envelope. And that's fine. That's not inherently a bad start to the story. It only becomes a bad start when Tsukasa takes it and then later, coincidentally, meets his old tutor. He then accidentally drops the letter, which the tutor takes. Coincidentally, she then meets the main antagonist of that story arc, and he ends up possessing the letter that Tsukasa wanted to give him. I keep racking my brain to find meaning here. There has to be some kind of meaning to this series of coincidences. It has to be trying to say something, maybe about Hiroshima, which the story is set in, or about the people, or about the ways they interact, the ways their histories are intertwined. But it doesn't concretely lean into it enough for me to believe anything. Any charitable interpretation of the story relies on me pulling shit out of my ass. Maybe that's a mark against me as a reader of the story. Maybe the meaning of the story eludes me because I'm not engaging with it on the right terms. If somebody out there has a more charitable interpretation to this story than I do, then please let me know. I really do want to talk to the people who found meaning in this. And this is far from the only arc that has this many coincidences in it. Every story has coincidences. This is, there is barely a single story in the world that doesn't have a coincidence in it. Technically, everything is a coincidence. Everything in life is a coincidence. I'm not trying to criticize the use of coincidence in story. It's just that it really feels like the hands of fate are more of a character than the characters themselves in Bad Boys. And is that the meaning? Did I arrive at the meaning? That the real main character of Bad Boys is fate itself? Is that the meaning? I don't know. If that is the meaning, then Hiroshi Tanaka did not sell me enough on that. I generally don't like to say things are bad just because I don't understand them, but the works of art that I don't understand that I still appreciate usually tap into some emotional truth. The only thing I feel from Bad Boys is that it was written on autopilot with no editor. I can't help but think that some more clever writing would do the story justice. Some more character-driven writing, because honestly, so many of the stories in this manga don't even really illuminate the character or personalities of any of the people in it. For all its melodrama, it doesn't tell us anything new or interesting or important. We seem to learn the most about these characters through the gags and the jokes. That's probably why I find the story to be at its most compelling when it's being a comedy, even if it is mostly fart jokes. Bad Boys is far from the last delinquent manga to feature sexual violence, but it is the manga whose sexual violence I will discuss the most because it gives me the opportunity to bring in a lot of information from the sociology books I read. We are now going to go through an incomplete list of sexual assaults in Bad Boys. At the start, a girl named Kumi has a very graphic sexual assault attempt on her, but she's saved by the main character Tsukasa. She then falls in love with him. Later, she's kidnapped by a guy named Hiro, who also graphically attempts to rape her in front of Tsukasa. But she ends up getting saved by Tsukasa and his friends. In another arc, a girl named Kaori attempts to orchestrate the rape of several girls, but is stopped by a girl named Erika. Erika tells Kaori that rape is like death to a woman, which is a very loaded sentence that you may or may not agree with for whatever reasons you may have, but at the end of the day, that is the philosophy Erika herself believes in, and it's a philosophy we can assume the story agrees with too. It's crazy that this conversation even had to happen because Kaori herself was almost a victim of rape until a guy saved her, after which she fell in love with him and became became his girlfriend. It's also crazy that Erica was the one to give us this story's philosophy on sexual violence, because Erica herself is the girlfriend of the aforementioned rapist Hiro. She doesn't break up with him after he attempts the rape on Kumi. Even though she's now one of Kumi's best friends, she's still dating the guy who almost raped her. In fact, Hiro, who we have reason to believe has raped before, soon becomes a recurring member of the cast. You may be thinking, oh, so he's rehabilitated. He stopped raping. No, he still rapes. There's this gag where he rapes a girl off-page in an elevator and leaves her crying, and this is in the middle of a chapter entirely centering a Kamen Rider versus Ultraman joke. This is a gag chapter. We're supposed to laugh at this, after all that other shit. This is not a Bebop High School situation where everything is bad but there's also no permanent trauma. We've seen the horror of rape in Bad Boys. We've seen, in writing, what these characters believe about rape, whether it happens or whether it's prevented. It also chooses to abandon that belief seemingly at random. In Erica and Hiro's backstory, she apparently orchestrates a fake rape on herself to attract Hiro to save her so she could become his girlfriend. But the guy she hired to fake rape her ends up actually trying to real rape her, and so Hiro saves her from a real rape. They have history before that, so we can tell Erica had feelings for Hiro before he saved her, and he kinda maybe had feelings for her as well before he saved her, but we just needed him to save her from a rape so we could, I don't know. It's also revealed that Hiro was in a sexual relationship with an adult woman when he was still a kid, and he was also addicted to paint thinner, so this is something to consider. Maybe the story's trying to comment on the socioeconomic conditions that led Hiro to the place he is, where he doesn't know how to treat women as people, but he also doesn't know how to treat himself as a person, or maybe he doesn't know how to express his feelings towards women in a healthy way. I'm not saying stories need to spell everything out for the audience, but whatever point the story's trying to make here, it's completely lost on me. We also get a story where, in the past, Yoji saved a girl from rape while another guy just watched as it was gonna happen. The girl instantly falls in love with Yoji after he saves her from this rape and remains in love with him for years. Despite that, she starts dating the guy who was just gonna watch her get raped, but she's still in love with Yoji the entire time. Later on in life, they meet each other again, and the girl gets kidnapped by the same guy who was gonna rape her in the backstory, again, and now he's kidnapping her to rape her again. Yoji sees this happening, but instead of running after her to save her, he goes to her boyfriend and tells him where she is so he can save her instead, so she can stop being in love with Yoji and start being in love with him. This is a pretty early story that I saved for last because it's literally spelling out for us that rape in the world of Bad Boys isn't just a horrific crime, or death to a woman. It's also an opportunity for men to prove themselves. In fact, it's more the latter than it is the former. The quality of your manhood is dependent on your ability to protect your woman, which necessitates that there must be a threat to the woman. Otherwise, how can you prove that manhood you got there? Here, what the men want is the admiration and the adoration of women. The main way they see to achieve that is by saving them from danger. I'm not against stories where people are saved from rape. I understand the fantasy. The fantasy of saving someone that's attractive to you from harm and being meaningful to them and mattering to them in that way that's like a life or death situation. And I also understand it from the flip perspective. There's tons of shoujo delinquent manga and shoujo manga in general, and a lot of stories for girls that's all about the girl getting saved by a very strong and capable man. I understand these fantasies. I'm just saying, when I'm reading a story and it's just the same fantasy over and over and over and over again, with basically no variation, what's the fucking situation here? If the only way in the world of Bad Boys for a man to attain the admiration of a woman is through saving her from a threat, then what if there is no threat? What if there was no danger? What then? How then would men attract women? Can Tanaka not see a world where a man wins a woman's heart as a function of the compatibility of their souls? Can it all only be a matter of circumstance? Right now, it seems that in the world of Bad Boys, there is a lot of rape, and women need to select their partners based on how well they can defend them from rape. It's a completely utilitarian situation. I'm totally fine with wish fulfillment fantasy stories, but when you repeat yourself this much, with very little to say about the thing that you're repeating, I'm just uncompelled. I am not moved. My emotions are not moved. All I feel is lethargy and sluggishness. In the few relationships that happen without any threat of sexual violence to save the woman from, there's barely anything there. The only one that I like is this guy and the girl who goes to Australia. That's not a bad romance. I actually kind of like this one. But of course, while she doesn't end up violated, she does end up getting kidnapped in a weird situation I'm not going to explain here. I don't really care enough to do that. Also, this guy was pals with Hiro when they were younger, back when Hiro was still committing the same amount of rapes as he is now. Then there's these two. They fall in love with each other not because he saved her from rape, but really because of no discernible reason. Like, we don't really see the unique way they interact with and love each other. It's just that he took her virginity and she wanted him to do that because she found him attractive. which I guess is kind of accurate for teenage romances, but as far as the story goes, I'm just not moved by this. Bad Boys is not really a realistic story, and the primary reason for that is there's no character here. Like, he doesn't have a distinct enough character, and she doesn't have a distinct enough character. There's nothing that defines each of them before they get into the relationship, and then after they get into the relationship, he still has to save her from being raped by her ex-boyfriend. At least they fell in love before that happened, so we can tell how shallow the relationships in the story really are. Without sexual violence, the story of Bad Boys is nothing. And yet, despite that, it has a metric fuckton of nothing to say about the subject. I think it's mainly because Hiroshi Tanaka is completely unconcerned with his characters. Like, over here we have another situation that's basically the exact same as all the other situations I've summarized. Guy saves a girl from rape, she falls in love with him. Except here it tries to do something. It tries to convey that these two now have a unique relationship that's beyond romance or sexuality. But it doesn't sell you on that. It won't sell you on that because it's completely uninterested in the intricacies and details of the relationship. Like, why do they get along so well? What is this sense of humor that they share so much that's making them laugh so much? Hiroshi Tanaka is satisfied to just show you them laughing. But me personally, I'm interested in why they're laughing. What is it they're bonding over? What kind of joke did she tell him that made him laugh so hard and he told her that made her laugh so hard? What is it that they share? Where is the emotional core? And let me not speak of the sequels. I read what chapters are available of Bad Boys Glare and Kippo, and Hiroshi Tanaka does not develop his sense of storytelling whatsoever. That's a little bit unfair. Kippo does get a little bit supernatural, but it doesn't get that much better. The art is always amazing. Hiroshi Tanaka is a great illustrator, even if he doesn't necessarily draw women with the same versatility that he draws men.
Hey, bitch! What nice ass. Fucking bitch!
If I was to speculate, I think Hiroshi Tanaka writes all his stories on autopilot. If you like Bad Boys, you'll probably like what there is of Glare. And if you, for some godforsaken reason, want more of Bad Boys but with supernatural elements added, go read the sequel Kippo. I want to use this as an opportunity to talk about sexual violence in bosozoku and delinquent culture in real life. You might notice that I've been using the term bad delinquent a lot in this video. The antagonists of most action stories in delinquent manga will most of the time just be bad delinquents. Delinquents of a lower moral character than our main characters. In Bad Boys, the rapists are generally fellow bosozoku. They're guys who come from the same vehicle enthusiast culture as our main characters, only they're part of a more morally reprehensible group. The only solution, it seems, is to have more good bosozoku to counter the bad bosozoku. The same culture birthed both people. How can we trust Tsukasa to be so virtuous when he pals around with a guy who tried to rape his girlfriend? This, like most stories, pulls from real life, where many bosozoku and Yankee guys committed rape and sexual assault against girls. When discussing it with Ikuya Sato, the rapist delinquents come across as very casual. They say that they specifically selected for delinquent girls when they felt like raping someone because they'd be less likely to tell the police. One of Ikuya Sato's informants compared rape and boso driving, asserting that the feeling was very similar in both, that he was doing something wrong in both scenarios and that excited him. What do I make of this? I feel completely unqualified to come to a conclusion about this. How do I compare the violation of traffic laws and the people's rights to a safe drive on the highway to the violation of sexual laws and the people's rights to their own sexual liberty? Obviously, in my mind, I judge someone way more harshly for committing rape than I do for committing traffic violations. But it seems here that the kind of activity that selects for irresponsible, reckless, self-annihilating people will also attract the kinds of people who are more likely to commit rape. I'm not trying to say that every bosozoku was a rapist, but it's clear that a blatant disregard for the well-being of others is not the kind of attitude that prevents a person from becoming a rapist. It seems that most of the time, the perpetrators knew the girls they violated. They had a rapport with them. It's not like in the manga where someone doesn't know a girl and attempts to rape her in an alleyway, or kidnaps her and tells the one guy who can stop what they're doing exactly where she's being raped. No, chances are the ones doing the raping are the ones who know her the best. So in a sense, Tsukasa remaining on good terms with a guy who almost raped his girlfriend is kinda realistic. Not that it all of a sudden makes it good writing. I do not know how to wrap this up and bring this back to all the other manga. It's not like this is the first and last serious discussion we're gonna have about delinquent manga, just that this is about as dark as it gets. It's only uphill from here. Let me end this with a compliment to Bad Boys. It probably has some of the better fart jokes in it. I only say that because off the top of my head, I can't think of another manga I've read that has this many fart jokes per chapter. I think Hiroshi Tanaka might have a thing for it. Like, there's a chapter whose entire central gag is that Tsukasa accidentally walks in on Kumi farting and shitting. He spends 20 straight pages contemplating it, and it culminates at a restaurant with him remembering her farting, and that gives him a gigantic boner, and he runs out of the restaurant and kisses her so hard that he shits himself. Bad Boys is far from the last manga I'm gonna hate on. One thing you realize about art is that there's no genre or medium where the majority of it is good. For every good fantasy book out there, there's at least a triple-digit number of Tolkien ripoffs just waiting to waste your time. I'm not calling Bad Boys a ripoff of anything necessarily, just that I liked it about as much as I would like a Tolkien ripoff. I didn't get into the research for this video expecting to enjoy everything I read. I went into it because I enjoyed some of the things that I'd read from it, and I wanted to see everything else that surrounded it. I just want people to know that I'm not trying to be a hater. I'd much rather spend time putting people onto the things I enjoy. But I don't think it would make for a very productive video to mindlessly discuss all my favorite delinquent manga, while at the same time ignoring the major problems pervasive in the genre. There's more value to be had from art than enjoyment. Sometimes a work of art wants you to feel angry, or depressed, or to instill in you a mood that is fundamentally opposed to happiness. Or maybe a work is just bad, in which case there's still value in experiencing it. My strong dislike of Bad Boys taught me something about myself, and it also contextualized for me many of the reasons I love the delinquent manga I love and hate the ones I hate. For that, I have to give my thanks. I also feel that this needs to be said because a lot of people can feel that criticizing their favorite work of art is an attack on their soul. I don't think you're a bad person for enjoying Bad Boys, and I don't think Hiroshi Tanaka is a bad person for making Bad Boys. I don't think you're an idiot, I don't think you're weird, at least not in a bad way. If anything, I want you to tell me what it was you loved so much about the manga that I hated. What made you care so much for the stuff that I didn't care for? Tell me your feelings in the comments, if for no other reason than to drive the engagement up on this video so that other people watch it. And then the views increase, and then it makes me more money, and then I get rich. Can I turn ads on in this video? How do I turn ads on? Hello? Hello? Anywho's, moving on. I can't believe it, chat. I can't believe it. Now let's do a lightning gauntlet to get some of these smaller manga out of the way. Yokohama Meibutsu. Very unremarkable. Falls in the same class as these. This is one of those JC staff OVAs they did just to promote the manga, which we don't have access to over here. I'm not gonna judge the manga for these OVAs too harshly because I've read the manga for a lot of these shitty OVAs, so I know that they don't do them justice more often than not. That said, if the manga is just more of the standard good delinquent versus bad delinquent stuff, then it probably isn't very interesting either. Chameleon! Eisaku Yazawa is a dirty little freak who wants to be a gang leader. It's hard to tell if he's lucky or unlucky. His plans get him into deep shit just as often as they get him out of it. Something about the amount of piss, puke, blood, snot, menstrual fluid, tortured cocks and balls, and artistic renditions of semen make it feel super gross. We get into a little bit of a comedy of misunderstandings here, where people will view him as a man amongst men, a koha, which he does want them to think, but it never happens when he wants it to. Like, he'll try to act tough and nobody buys it, but then when he's trying to be cowardly and accidentally ends up doing something very heroic, everybody buys it. That's pretty much what happens in every episode. You might as well give this one a shot. It's kinda mid, but it's not the worst kinda mid. Shonan Junai Gumi! Wait, this isn't a part of the lightning gauntlet. I actually have stuff to say about this one. It starts off as the opposite of Kyokara Orewa. Instead of two normals wanting to become delinquents, we get two delinquents who want to become normals. Well, they fail spectacularly, and pretty quickly we're back to having a standard delinquent story on our hands, featuring Dan Maryuji and Eikichi Onizuka, who never went on to do anything ever again. I can't really recommend this one. It has a lot of the same problems as Bad Boys, lots of rape, a few rapists who get redeemed afterwards. Somehow, you don't really see what redeems them. Kinda like Hero in that we're just expected to accept the story's new framing of them. There's also the issue of the uninspired fights, the constant need to have a villainous delinquent who's so morally depraved that our main characters need to become heroes to defeat them, and the process of defeating them usually just comes down to punching them harder. On the occasions that it doesn't come down to that, it's still not a very compelling solution. Kyokara Orewa had its fair share of bad delinquents, but it rarely ever touched on the matter of sexual violence because it understood its capacity. It understood how much baggage it could handle. Junai Gumi and Bad Boys fall into the same problems over and over, except for one crucial difference. Well, two differences. Number 1. Junai Gumi is actually funny. And more importantly, Number 2. Junai Gumi starts to get good after a while. Around the 200-ish chapter mark, so pretty late, but around that point we see Toru Fujisawa start to develop his sense of humor and his pacing. And he starts to tell stories that are more interesting than the ones he started off with. The kinds of stories that he would go on to excel in with GTO. Fewer fights, more shenanigans, and then drama that comes from the shenanigans. It's insane how much better suited a delinquent manga premise is to slice-of-life comedy than it is to action. I only recommend Junai Gumi to anyone who's curious to see what a completely standard 80s delinquent manga is like, even though it began publishing in the 90s. And that's only if you can handle a lot of sexual violence in a story. This is, for its first 200 chapters, the most basic that this 80s formula can possibly get. Also, one thing I neglected to mention is that Fujisawa is a complete motorcycle head. If you want any manga to sell you on how obsessed Bosozoku really were with their vehicles, this is the manga to read. You might notice the word shonan pop up a lot in delinquent manga. Shonan is a beachside region in Japan that a lot lot of Bosozoku either operated out of or went to visit because of the beach. Both Junaigumi and Bakusozoku have stories about surfing a gigantic shonan wave. I just felt like mentioning that. I actually don't have much to say beyond that. Just that Shonan and Yokohama as well are recurring locations in Bosozoku manga. But here's the thing. Just a few months before Junaigumi started publishing, the first chapter of a different manga would release. The manga that would go on to define every delinquent manga that came after it, whether directly or indirectly. If you're already familiar with delinquent manga, then you probably know what I'm talking about. I'm talking about Crow. I love this one, 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 I love this one! Where do I even begin with Crows? Crows is about a guy named Boya Harumichi. It's also about the guys that end up surrounding him. Boya Harumichi can easily be defined by the company that he keeps. The guys who can't help but follow him even though he absolutely does not want to be a bancho. By the way, I've been holding out on you guys. You see, banchos haven't been a thing for about 30 years.
30 years from the 90s, not the modern day. 30 years from the 90s.
I'm not exaggerating. By the time Yu Yake Bancho released in 1967, banchos were already becoming a thing of the past. Parent-teacher associations collaborated with police heavily to focus on juvenile crime, so that by the 70s, anyone calling themselves a bancho would have been laughed at for how outdated they were. That doesn't mean a lot of the stuff we see in these manga is entirely fabricated, though. One-on-one taimans to determine the successor of the bancho, delinquents infiltrating sports clubs at school and making them inhospitable for actual participants, massive gang fights at the riverbank where the losing bancho would become the under bancho, or kobun, of the winning bancho, inter-school alliances and delinquent gangs with numbers in the 50-plus range, girls wanting to sleep with a bancho, guys wanting to take pictures with a bancho. You can see why communities wanted to stamp this stuff out. Boya Harumichi just transferred into the infamous school Suzerain, a delinquent high school. Not like Ultimate Path that deliberately taught kids how to become good Japanese nationalist yakuza, but more like Akahisa from Kyokara Orewa, one of the schools the antagonists come from, and also the fishing school from Bebop High School. Basically any school that the antagonists of previous delinquent manga would have been from. Suzerain is the strongest school in town. It's a school that's never in its entire history been united under one man. So Boya Harumichi transfers in. He has no aims to take over the school. He's just here because, as he puts it, he kept on getting fucking expelled for being an asshole. Man, all I want to say is that Crows gets it. It understands exactly what to go for. Yeah, there are still bad delinquents. Our main characters still have some kind of moral imperative to fight the bad guy, but our main characters are also not heroes. At the end of the day, at least the way I feel about it, between all the jokes and the intimate character moments, all this fighting seems inconsequential in the most beautiful way possible. The mangaka, Hiroshi Takahashi, truly understands that this delinquent shit is just a bunch of kids playing war. Crows tells you to look at the molehill these idiots are making a mountain out of, and then it asks you to maybe just play along with them for a while. These wayward sons of the world and their concrete legends, just trying to carve their names in before it gets paved over. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm looking at this the wrong way, but I really think Crows is the Watchmen of delinquent manga. Please, no, wait, let me finish. I actually don't want to say something like that so concretely when I don't actually know how special Crows is in relation to other delinquent manga on a factual level. I only know what it means to me emotionally. So what I really mean to say is this. Delinquent manga came from sports manga, and then it became rags to riches coming-of-age stories, and then it became romances and comedies and martial arts action stories. Along the way, there have been a few delinquent manga that actually had something to say about delinquency, but even in these stories, the focus was divided among its other aspects. It's comedy, it's action. Crows is the first manga I've read that has so much it wants to say specifically about delinquents. It's the first story I've seen to go about writing its characters with this kind of fatalistic humor, to frame its action in a way that feels so grand and titanic, and so small at the same time. Yes, you can call Crows a comedy. Yes, you can call it an action story. But all of its comedy and action is in service of saying something about the delinquency that birthed it. It is undeniably delinquent as genre first, and everything else afterwards. And the things Crows has to say about delinquency must be reckoned with now that it exists, whether future authors of delinquent manga have read Crows or not, whether they're even aware of it or not, which most likely they are. It's tough to put into words what it feels like reading Crows in the midst of all these other delinquent manga. It's like a monument. Now that you've seen it, it can't stop existing, it always has to be here. Everything else now has to be recontextualized around it. Everything that leads up to it and everything that comes after it must now reckon with its existence. You can't say that about every single delinquent manga, not even all the popular ones. But you kinda do have to say that about Crows, the gravity that it has. It's like a landmark in the landscape of delinquent manga. It is, without a shadow of a doubt, the first delinquent manga of the 90s. And I don't mean that on a factual level, although it did come out in 1990, and before Shonan Junaigumi had the trappings of an 80s delinquent manga. It was very much rooted in the 80s. And so many delinquent manga of the 90s would be stuck in their 80s trappings, would be unable to escape this black hole. Crows is the first of its kind, and it belongs firmly in the 90s. While the 80s had several delinquent manga that you can reasonably say defined it, Bebop High School, Shonan Bakusozaku, Kyokara Orewa, Rokudenashi Blues, so many manga that contributed to the identity of this genre during that decade. In the 90s, it's really just Crows. That's not to say there's no other good delinquent manga in the 90s, but something of this level of popularity and influence, unfortunately, it also seems that Crows is the defining delinquent manga of the 2000s as well. Not to say there aren't any good delinquent manga in the 2000s and 2010s, it's just that you'll see me start to hate on a lot more manga going forward, and I think a big part of that is that so many of the delinquent manga that came after Crows seem unable to escape Crows' gravity. They either retread the ideas that Crows already had, but they don't really arrive at any new interesting conclusions from it, or they retread the stuff that came before Crows, and they have even fewer interesting things to say about those.
Crows
Understands the transience of youth, which is the most beautiful part of being a troublemaker as a kid. This thing isn't built to last. Yeah, these strong guys and their gangs and their stories are fun, but there's a reason it's called juvenile delinquency. There's a reason beyond legality that these guys fight so hard and put so much on the line in this short amount of time that they have. And it's tied inextricably to the fact that they weren't promised anything else. By the time they graduate, they can see it all for what it really is. All they want to do is leave it all out there on the court. Crows is a manga that feels like it's told entirely from the perspective of a senpai from Suzerain, watching over all his underclassmen. He understands how silly this all is, but he can't help but feel that pang of nostalgia. Maybe he's a little sorrowful that he was born too early to throw fists with Boya Harumichi. If there's one thing that's special about Boya, it's that no man escapes his fists unchanged. A fight with Boya Harumichi means a complete re-evaluation of who you are as a person. He's delinquent Goku, converting enemies to friends, except these friends call themselves his underlings, and he doesn't want any underlings. And the ones that don't become friends, well, they still turn out alright in the end. And that's all thanks to Boya Harumichi. I view the character of Boya Harumichi as something of a titan. By the end of Crows, and I'm not going to spoil it by the way, I personally feel that Boya Harumichi has become something greater than a delinquent. A lot of delinquent characters want to establish their names in legend. Basically, they want to become urban legends, guys whose names are spoken of in fear or in reverence. Boya Harumichi becomes something more than just an urban legend, and that's through no aspiration of his own. It's just a function of who he is. Boya Harumichi becomes something akin to a folk hero, a timeless figure that small towns get their names from, a story half remembered by the old or by anyone who is lucky enough to be in the right place at the right time. While many delinquents have carved their names into concrete, Boya has carved his name into dream, and we both know which one lasts longer. Crows comes with a massive recommendation, but I don't want to move on without showing you how fucking funny this manga is. The extremely minute situations Takahashi will make jokes out of. Look at this. Look at the paneling. Look how straightforward this all is. I don't know if folksy is the right way to describe it, but I imagine Tatsuo Kamon's song Yankee no Onichan playing over most of these. Pavement fits well too. The Blue Hearts, of course, which Takahashi is a huge fan of. The Street Beats, who made the theme song for the Crows movies, which we'll get into later. Look at this impeccable sequence. The man catches his breath. He looks behind him. It's just a truck passing by, carrying Boya Harumichi. Let's not mince words here. This is mastery. I only wish more mangaka understood what Crows was trying to say, including Takahashi himself. Crows has some good spin-off stories. Crows Gaiden really sells the Boya Harumichi as a folk hero reading. And if you like that, then you absolutely need to read Harumichi. Made almost 20 years after Crows by Suzuki Dai, one of Takahashi's former assistants. It perfectly sells that idea, and I'm not gonna say anything else.
Bro, all I'm gonna say is chapter 25, bro. Chapter 25, that's all I'm gonna say, bro. If you know, you know. If you read it, you're gonna know, and then you're gonna know. Bro, listen, bro. Chapter 25, bro. Listen, bro. Oh my god.
Like Crows Gaiden, read Harumichi. But Worst, on the other hand, man, listen, I don't dislike Worst. It's fine. It's perfectly decent. It's an above-average manga, which puts it well above the average delinquent manga. It's funny, the fights are well drawn, but it doesn't carry the same pathos that Crows did. It introduces so many characters early on that I'm convinced Worst has the record for most named character introductions per chapter. Worst leans harder into the more conventional style of delinquent story. A convention that, by 2001 when it started publishing, had thoroughly been molded by Crows' presence. Of Takahashi's non-Crows Crows output, I prefer Kiku, a short 7-chapter manga that perfectly, through its words and its art and its length, illustrates the transience of youth in a way that Crows simply wasn't able to. Hey, Crows did as good of a job as it could, but it takes a story like Kiku to really show you what it all means. To really show you that what these delinquents are looking for is something that's impossible to find where the rest of society is. To be a delinquent is a doomed pursuit that you're lucky to grow out of. But while you're still in it, shit man, it takes a 7-chapter manga to do that. I said we would talk about the Crows film trilogy, but I don't really want to. It's a prequel trilogy with the first 2 directed by Takashi Miike and the third one directed by Toshiaki Toyoda. So you'd think they're all amazing, but no, they pretty much all suck. None of them understand in the slightest what made Crows so special. They're such humorless stories that whatever humor is there isn't even that funny. And they're all so overcomplicated with plots about the Yakuza and shit. This is not Crows, and even if I were to rate these movies on their merits as movies alone, I still don't like them. By the way, if you've been thinking that Bouya Harumichi bears some similarities to Eguchi Yosuke from Shonan Bakusozaku, then you're not unjustified in thinking that. In one of Takahashi's later manga, QP, the mangaka for Bakusozaku is referenced offhand in a way that lets us know Takahashi is at least a little bit of a fan. From Fujimaru to Yosuke to Hiroshi and Toru to Tyson to Bouya, the lineage of the Pompadour. It's only 10 chapters and it's one of the funniest manga I've ever read. Every page is like 30 jokes happening at once. It's based on the Kunio-kun series of games, which, if I was a delinquent media completionist, I would have played all of them. But the Kunio-kun franchise is another one of those things that needs its own video. I did, however, play The Friends of Ringo Ishikawa a while back, which is a game where you play out a delinquent's last few months of senior year of high school. You can choose to spend your time getting into fights, reading, studying, working out, smoking. Having played a little bit of Kunio-kun for the Super Nintendo, it's clear that Ringo took some inspiration from it gameplay-wise. The open world, or rather open city, the fighting mechanics where you pick up handbags and shit like that, running through guys' pockets after you beat their asses to get their money. But Ringo Ishikawa wasn't meant to be the mascot for a franchise. Ringo Ishikawa is a lot more final. I'd say Kunio-kun resembles more closely Shonan Bakusozaku in tone, while Ringo Ishikawa feels more like Kiku. Angel Densetsu! I can't believe this manga is this good. That's the 3rd good manga in a row. This is one of the best comedies of misunderstandings I've ever seen. The central premise is that the main character, Kitano Seiichiro, has a face like the most dastardly villain in all the world. Everyone's scared of him because of how terrifying he looks. But deep down in his heart and soul, he is the kindest man to ever live. He's kind, but in a way that's not preachy or overbearing. He takes the load on himself, and he can handle it. There's tons of comedies that try to do what Angel Densetsu does, but none of them are on this level. This one's only a delinquent manga at the start, and only by accident, and without the knowledge of the main character, who is so charitable and well-meaning that he walks through the valley of delinquenthood as a saint. I don't have any profound things to say about Angel Densetsu. There's only so many times I can say that a thing is good and funny. I'll say that if you don't like the central gag at the beginning, just know that it gets developed, and eventually the story changes completely. By the end, you will have walked away from Angel Densetsu with far more than just laughs. This manga also has a character named Ryoko, who, like Riko in Keikao, knows how to fight, thus relieving Seiichiro of any need to rescue her and giving their relationship the opportunity to flower without those constraints. This is one of the best relationships in any of the manga I've read for this video. Also, the Bancho underling dynamic between Seiichiro and Yuji is tremendous. I get chills thinking about this manga sometimes. Of all the great men and Banchos of delinquent manga, it seems that the accidental ones tend to be the best ones. Seiichiro is a true man amongst men in a way that most other delinquent characters could only ever hope to be. Listen man, if you can hear my fridge in the background, then you can hear my fridge in the background. Like, I don't really know what you want from me. Nanbu no Manjai! I know this looks like Yokohama Meibutsu, but this is a completely different cheap OVA adaptation of a manga about a Bosozoku gang with a fat mask-wearing leader. The amount of rape scenes in this one, all of which are played for jokes, makes this feel like the anime equivalent of the King Batch elevator video. There's also this sequence where a character bumps a guy who's fucking his girl on the road, so she flies out the sunroof and he aims his car to have her land on his erect penis, so he can fuck her instead, all while he's being chased by the cops. Hallelujah! Let me explain the Hallelujah situation to you. In 1992, a mangaka named Haruto Umezawa made a short manga called Hallelujah. It's about the son of God named Hallelujah, who's destined to be the god of the 21st century, but he's a complete playboy who just wants to get drunk and fuck on the angel broads. So to teach him a lesson, God sends him down to earth and takes from him all his powers, except for some reason his tremendous strength. And now his goal is to learn how to not be a piece of shit. He ends up rooming at a church under the care of a beautiful nun, and he goes to a school with delinquents, and there's delinquents on the streets selling drugs, and he solves delinquent problems by fighting. Until the end, where he learns what it means to be human, and he's taken back into heaven. I'm not telling you everything that happened. I semi-recommend reading Hallelujah 1. It's short and it does pay off in the end, but it's also kind of boring with its overly simplistic morality and solutions to problems. I also think there was a wasted opportunity letting Hallelujah keep his heavenly strength, because he could have then had to use his brain to solve problems instead of just his fists, but whatever.
I actually neglected to mention that one of the things in the setup of Hallelujah is that because Hallelujah is the god of the 21st century, if he doesn't learn what it means to be human before the turn of the millennium, the world is destroyed. He will effectively bring about the apocalypse if he doesn't do this. So he's kind of on a time crunch. This is really a great setup, and I called it boring, but what I should have called it was mid. The good kind of mid. It's like this is a solid good mid. Like, okay, yeah, it's a little boring, but I could easily see myself watching or reading an episode or chapter of this every week for a few years. It's that kind of pleasant story.
Then, a month after Hallelujah 1 ended, came the remake, Hallelujah 2, a manga much longer and much worse than Hallelujah 1. For starters, we don't even have the impeccable setup of the original. It just drops us into a world where Hallelujah lives with his dad at a church, and his dad isn't even God anymore. At least I don't remember him being God. I am not rereading the early chapters to confirm that or not. Hallelujah is not here to learn any lessons or to improve as a person. He has way fewer flaws. Like, he's still just as prideful as he was before, but his pride never gets him into any serious trouble. At least not anything he can't fight his way out of, because he's still just as strong, if not stronger, than he was before. He's also way less of a playboy. His goal here is world domination, not really fucking on any broads. I think it's supposed to be endearing how this prideful idiot keeps talking about world domination and keeps treating everyone like his underlings, but I don't know. He just comes off annoying to me, and for 300 chapters, like, listen, man, I'm not trying to shit on every annoying character. Some annoying characters are fine. Some annoying characters are amazing. This guy's just not. Every arc here is about some irredeemable bad delinquents that our main characters have to beat up. I say main characters, but mainly it's Hallelujah doing the beating. And the beatings are not that interesting. Occasionally that one other character whose name I forget is also involved, but there's literally an entire arc towards the end where Hallelujah fights every single bad guy. And every other character's there for no fucking reason whatsoever. Like, the girls accompany the guys there only to get kidnapped immediately. And the action has no vigor, no motion, no intrigue, no swag. There's nothing we learn, nothing gained or lost by having a functionally invincible protagonist stand on business against irredeemably bad one-dimensional villains. Like, there's no challenge here.
Okay, I don't think I expressed myself very well in the script, so I'm going to do this here in this sort of unscripted section where I just talk laying back with my mic right next to my face. Let me put it like this. Hallelujah's villains are boring. They're very one-dimensional characters. They're just a bunch of guys with bad intentions. They're guys with ill will who want to hurt people for their own gain. And that's fine. Sometimes we just want to see our heroes defeat some dastardly, irredeemable villain and beat the shit out of them. That's cathartic. Okay, sure, fine. But there has to be some kind of draw, something special that draws us in, something that separates it from the kind of dog shit that a child could write. So the villains have their gimmicks. These are gimmicky villains who have their sort of unique abilities or tools that they use to attack our heroes with. Then it's sort of like a Hunter x Hunter or JoJo's type deal, right? Where our main characters have to find creative and interesting solutions to these gimmicks, right? No, not at all. What happens every single time without fail is that Hallelujah just overpowers the villains with his superior biology. And the other guy also, even though he's weaker than Hallelujah, also ends up overpowering the villains, even though he doesn't have superior, like, it doesn't matter. There are solutions that Haruto Umezawa think is creative, that he might believe that these are creative solutions to the problems that he poses, but really it just boils down to overpowering the opponents with your raw strength. So there's no ideological conflict, and there's no physical conflict. Our characters are martially and ideologically superior to our opponents in every way. So what's left? Is it at least visually interesting? Well, we can say that Umezawa's art is expertly drawn. You can tell that the guy spent a lot of time drawing and developing his style. Unfortunately, it's just a boring-ass style. It's a style with nothing to say. There's nothing interesting about this style. It's very bland. It's practiced, it's consistent, but it's not dynamic, it doesn't move me. There is no point at which I am in awe of the visual splendor. I am never captivated by a page or a panel that Umezawa draws. So I guess on that level, we can say that it's a cohesive story. On a narrative and on a visual level, which are the two levels that comics operate on, it is very boring. It's consistently boring. And you can imagine that Hallelujah is the kind of story that's very inequipped to handle rape. Like, eventually there are a few rape sort of storylines in it that I complimented Kyokara Orewa for staying away from rape and understanding what its baggage was, what it could handle. And I also hesitate to call Bad Boys complex, but it is far more complex than Hallelujah by orders of magnitude. Because Hallelujah, for all intents and purposes, is like a fucking superhero comic, dude. It's like, it's supposed to be for kids.
Skip to the timestamp if you're triggered by discussions and visuals of sexual violence, by the way.
So why, around the 200 chapter mark, the nun from the Hallelujah 1 story ends up getting turned into a sort of teacher type character around the later part of Hallelujah 2. And then there's this whole thing where the bad delinquent ends up recording himself on video, undressing and groping the barely conscious or unconscious character that Hallelujah loves so much. And that's the thing that's supposed to motivate him to action. That's the thing that's supposed to motivate him to beat the shit out of this guy. And I'm sitting here, I'm thinking like, dude, this story is not equipped to handle this kind of idea, this concept. And then later in the last arc, there's literally a bad delinquent with a rape van full of drugged up girls that are chained inside of his van. And he's trying to kidnap one of our main character girls to add to his rape collection. Like, hello? So our villains are one-dimensional, but also our main characters are one-dimensional too? Like, there's barely anything going on with our main characters. Whatever the main character trait you can imagine is theirs, that's the only thing that will define them for the whole story. Like, she's a good girlfriend, he wants to be an artist and is a hard worker and a good person. This guy's a musician and then Hallelujah is prideful. Before, he had a lot of issues he had to work out. He had a lot of vices, a lot of character flaws that he had to work through. He was prideful, but he was also lustful, greedy, gluttonous. Like, the guy had a laundry list of problems to work through. Now he's just prideful. And he's not prideful in a comedic or entertaining way. It's just the same joke over and over again. You guys are my slaves. I'm gonna dominate the world. And it's never, that's all, it never develops into anything. And I'm just so puzzled as to how Hallelujah 1 got canceled at 10 chapters and Hallelujah 2 ended up running for almost 300 chapters. Why did we get stuck in the nightmare reality, dude? It should have been the other way around. Hallelujah 2 should have got canceled at 10 chapters for being an irredeemable pile of dog shit, and Hallelujah 1 should have run for 300 chapters. I can't believe I'm riding so hard for a story that I don't even think is that good. Listen, dude, if you love Hallelujah 2, by all means, tell me why you love Hallelujah 2 in the comments, because I don't understand it. I don't fucking get what is so special about this story. There's nothing going on here.
Blue Spring! You'll be dropped in the middle of a conversation you have no frame of reference for and then taken out of it before it reaches anything resembling a conclusion. Slice of life is taken very literally here. It tapped into a lot of the feelings I had when I was a teenager. I wouldn't call high school me a delinquent because I was lucky enough to not get in trouble with the law. But as far as the feeling of disillusionment goes, Blue Spring really taps into it in a way that resonated with me. You're trapped in your own skin, bound by laws made by people you never met, and your own biology which you couldn't choose. Sometimes, obliteration feels like the only other option. Some people are never presented with another option. I don't want to reduce the manga by calling it a nihilistic work, but hope rarely shines down on these characters. As much as I like this manga, the movie adaptation is probably my favorite movie of all time. The film, which combines a few of the stories from the manga, mainly focuses on the first chapter. It feels a lot more steady, silent than the manga. Kujo, the main character, is made Bancho of the school by a feat of great bravery. Yeah, I guess he's strong and he has a sort of silent charisma that makes guys kinda wanna follow him, but Blue Spring goes the extra mile to illustrate to us how meaningless the title of Bancho really is. You become king of what? A school that nobody gives a fuck about? A throne of trash is all you win. This clapping game that these laughing fools play because they have no regard for life. Disillusionment is an understatement. Kujo quickly becomes disillusioned with the disillusionment of delinquency. The walls marked with his name, the territory, none of it means anything. One guy had a shot at the Koshien. Seishun, the springtime of youth. He made the wrong call. It fell apart. And so he hung up his youth on a hanger and left it to the underclassmen. He doesn't need the rest of the semester to mourn. He's out of here. And so one by one, the faces in the photos get crossed out. Kujo, atop the mountain of delinquency, looks down, and he sees nothing there. This delinquency that places such a value on youth, but it burns through it like only so much fuel, and has its adherents reminiscing at bars before they know it, converting experience into memory at an astonishing rate.
a rate beyond that which life naturally intends. When I first watched this movie in 2021, it changed me severely. Without this, Catcher in the Rye and Wind Up Bird Chronicle being such huge parts of my January in 2021, I would have probably still been. So I wrote a book instead, and I put it out December of last year. Of course, you can read it for free. I plan on making all of my books free, at least for the online releases. And listen, I'm about to criticize my own book, but don't let that dissuade you from reading it. I want you to read it. I want you to see what a first book looks like from someone who is so moved by a Japanese movie from 2001 that he reevaluated the entire trajectory of his life. It's a book about delinquents, but not Japanese delinquents. Rather, delinquents the way I know them, or the way I think I know them. Delinquents closer to home. Let's put it that way. It's a juvenile and amateurish work, but it had to be. I could have taken it all apart and written it all over again from the start, but I had to move on. Much like Cujo from Blue Spring, I grew up. Only it took me a lot longer than the season of spring to do so. The story is so married to the person I was during January of 2021, and any attempt to divorce it from that would have felt like a betrayal. It would betray the Saint Deleter of January 2021. Who needs somewhere to rest. January of 2021 took the next 24 months from me. I don't even know if I love Blue Spring as much as I used to. I mean, I certainly do love Blue Spring. I rewatched it and I still love it, but I love it from a different angle. I used to revel in the spectacle, but now I see the movie and it makes me want to cry different tears. Tears for how stuck these boys are in this concrete portrait. Yes, every movie is about the same characters going through the same things every time you watch it. But with Blue Spring, more than with any other film to me, it feels like a moment in time framed in a portrait, cast in stone. These boys can never become more than what they are here, and they'll be boys forever, just like the me I buried last December. I've never had the limits of a story sink into my bones the way this one has. God, it's weight. Let's move on to the next one. Come on, funny voice man. Shibai Taruka? I couldn't find the manga for this one, but I could find the OVA, which is animated like a fucking MTV cartoon. The studio behind this is the same studio behind so many terrible OVAs that we've covered in this video, whose sole purpose is to sell the manga they're adapting. You'd think if they really want to sell the manga, they'd make an anime that's good. But who am I to judge these successful business practices? They made a company that lasted 41 years. I can barely make a video. Back to Shibai Taruka. This is the anime you see in your dreams when you've read too much delinquent manga. I've stopped believing entirely that this is real, no matter what that shitty-ass website My Anime List tells me. You guys haven't even added Gekigokutora Ika, and I can confirm that one's real. So I truly believe Shibai Taruka was made from my dream stuff.
なんだ
ケツんとこほころびたあるやないかい。脱げや、ぬたるさかいに。
構わねえよ。お前の気持ちだけは受け取っとくぜ。
遠慮すんなや。
Double hard! I'm so glad we only have a few chapters of this available to us. It's such a vibeless story. A Japanese high school guy returns from America to crack down on bad delinquents. Except this story stopped joking around and made its main character a teenage cop. That's basically what the rest of these guys are, only this story's honest about it. And also the main character is way more boring. The anime looks like a PS2 cutscene, and honestly, this should have been a video game instead of a manga. Double Hard could never be a fighting game. A beat-em-up is way more appropriate. Arakure Night! It's sad to see the spiritual successor to Shonan Bokusozoku fall so hard. It's like Bokusozoku inspired a generation of Bosozoku stories worse than it, and Arakure Night ended up taking more inspiration from those stories with its basic-ass good delinquent versus bad delinquent situation. Of course, this is one of those shitty-ass 2-episode OVAs, so I can't judge the manga too harshly. Teacher round! We've finally arrived at GTO. Manga about teachers teaching a class full of delinquents are pretty common, so I want to use this opportunity to discuss every delinquent teacher manga ever made that we have access to in English. In chronological order, starting with Madonna! If you can hear my family talking in the background, then you can hear my family talking in the background. Like, what do you want me to do? You want me to go down there and tell them to shut the fuck up? Like, bro, come on, bro. A hot teacher starts teaching a school of incorrigible delinquents. Just another one of those OVAs we've talked so much about. You can definitely tell they skipped shit from the manga because 1 minute the students are sexually assaulting the teacher and the next she has complete control over them. Eventually, she gets them to start playing rugby. And we get one of the best city pop songs I've ever heard in my life. If I had to guess, I'd say this is heavily inspired by the 1984 TV show School Wars, about a former rugby player who showed up and coached a delinquent school's rugby team and made them good or something. I don't know, I can't find it. High School Jingy! Another OVA adaptation, this time about a Yakuza who's sent to teach a bunch of high school kids and then he beats the shit out of his delinquent students and like fucking, I don't remember anything. Mellow! Another OVA adaptation about a crossdresser who takes the place of his teacher sister who teaches a delinquent class at a school who only has one episode and no subtitles, and it literally shows the manga set at the start of the episode and they're not even hiding how little they care. Great teacher, Onizuka! I cannot believe I'm older than Onizuka is here. I watched the anime in freshman year of high school. It's been over a decade. God damn. In this story, Fujisawa makes the bold decision to make his main character, a beloved character from his previous series, into a pedophile. My favorite thing about GTO is how dirty and grimy it is. Onizuka is a porn addict who becomes a teacher in the first place because he wants to fuck his students. His friend, Saejima, a character you'll remember from Junai Gumi, is a dirty cop who tries to sell him roofies to rape women with and illegal pornography, both of which he impounded from actual criminals. Saejima solicits sex services from high school girls via some fucking phone prostitution service. There's one teacher who crawls into the sewers and pokes his head out of a toilet with night vision goggles on to spy on his students shitting and pissing. In one chapter, Onizuka gets a job picking suicided dead bodies off the train tracks to make some extra money, and his supervisor remarks that it's a lucky day when he gets to pick a woman's body off the tracks. This is a disgusting world that makes you want to take a shower after diving into it. Notably, the delinquents Onizuka has to teach aren't the same 80s Bosozoku rejects that we're used to. This is a new age of delinquency. These kids cyberbully, kinda. They have very intricate and personal torment agendas for their targeted bullying victims. They don't just get in stupid fights. These kids are strategic, and winning over their hearts will be a challenge indeed. The reason Onizuka resonates with his students more than any other teacher, despite the fact that he's a pedophile, is that he keeps it real, at least according to the logic of the story. Pretty much every male teacher in this story is a pedophile or a sex pervert in some way. So I guess Onizuka's more juvenile and honest perversion is a breath of fresh air. I think the story wants us to think of Onizuka as being more of a senpai than a sensei to these kids. Rookies! I just realized that I don't have anything of value to say about Rookies. Like, I just like it, you know? It's a good manga. Angel Voice is kind of a ripoff of Rookies, in a way, you know? They're both about teachers who are trying to clean up these sports clubs at their schools that are overtaken by delinquents. I mean, we could say that Angel Voice is a ripoff of Rookies, which is a ripoff of Madonna, which is a ripoff of School Wars, but I don't know what's a ripoff and what's not. And does it really matter? I mean, at the end of the day, some of these are stories that elicit emotions strongly and some of them aren't. Rookies is a fine manga. You should go read it. I really like the character of Kawato, who's basically like a Mary Sue kind of teacher, kind of like Robin Williams in Dead Poets Society, except like Kawato is a lot more naive. He's basically perfect. He has perfect trust in his students, even though they give him every reason not to trust them. He puts himself and his well-being on the line for their sake. He is like the idealized teacher, and it's compelling to see that kind of character, this sort of teacher savior. Goku-san! Look at these pages. Do you feel refreshed now? The first thing I noticed when I arrived at this manga during my research phase was how simple the artwork and paneling is. It felt so uncluttered, like I could finally relax.
And now I'm just gonna show you footage from the anime instead for the rest of this section because I don't like editing manga panels.
I don't really drink soda, but occasionally I'll have an ice-cold Sprite with a splash of lemon, and it takes the entire weight off my mind, body, and ass crack. This one does the whole Yakuza teaching delinquent class thing right. Fuck you, high school Jingy. The main character, Yankumi, gives Boya Harumichi a run for his money as my favorite character of all delinquent manga. I mostly read manga in silence, but there were times I was reading this that I had the band Cecil's album CinemaScope playing in the background, and it fits very well. A lot of josei manga fit well with these Shibuya-ish pop rock bands. Did I mention this manga was funny? I just want to make sure we're clear on that before we move on. Also, the funniest chapters are the extra ones with Shin and the dog. Do not skip those. Come and teach! I totally forgot to read this one. Debusen! All you need to know is that it's kind of a GTO knockoff. A completely unqualified person becoming a teacher to a class of delinquents and slowly befriending them and getting them to open up and be more vulnerable and become better people, I guess. Except this time it's all on accident, like it's a comedy of misunderstandings where the teacher's doing all of this unintentionally. And there's this supernatural element where the teacher does not intend to do any good because he's a completely irredeemable sack of shit. Honestly, I didn't find it to be that funny, and the emotional payoff that it wanted to have at the very end, it didn't work on me, precisely because the main character doesn't really learn anything the whole way through, doesn't really intend to do any good, and only does good by accident, and only develops this relationship with his students entirely on accident. I just, it doesn't completely work on me. Maybe if it was a little bit more gross and morally reprehensible, like this is an irreverent comedy. This is a comedy that's trying to be very offensive. I mean, our main character is considered very repulsive and reprehensible because of his lack of hygiene and because he's a fat crossdresser. Those are literally the three main traits that are considered reprehensible by the story. And if it leaned into its political incorrectness harder,
but I don't know, man. There's a lot of things this story could have done to make me like it more. I'm good off this.
Zeton Sensei! A spin-off of Crows and Worst, where one of my favorite characters, Zeton, becomes a teacher, much like Kawato from Rookies. Right down to the scheming, conniving principal who wants him to get the whole delinquent class expelled and make him the fall guy. Zeton doesn't coach any sports teams, at least as far as I've read, because this is still an ongoing manga, but he has a similar attitude to Kawato, if a little rougher around the edges from being a student at the most delinquentest high school ever. Zeton doesn't actually teach at Suzerain in this manga. His goal is to get the recommendation needed to teach at Suzerain, which is something you apparently need. Zeton has loftier goals, both for his class here at this school and for his future at Suzerain. I love this development for Zeton's character. Reading Crows and Worst, you understand exactly how he could end up as a teacher. Yeah, he has delinquent's blood in him, but you see especially in Worst that he doesn't really give a fuck about any of this. I'm happy for him. I want him to succeed. That about wraps up the Teacher's Corner. Ningen Kyoki Katsuo!
There's a character in this manga called Ryuzaki. She's like the main character, Katsuo's sensei. She teaches him a martial art that he uses to beat up the bad delinquents. And she starts off as a very strong, hot girl with very little personality. Over time, however, she becomes a very weak, hot girl with very little personality. Like, all her martial power sort of disappears as if she transferred it over to Katsuo so that he can save her or some shit. I'm gonna be honest, I dropped this manga, even though it's pretty short. And I've finished longer manga that I like less, like Hallelujah. I just was not able to tolerate the repetitive nature of Ningen Kyoki Katsuo. It's constantly just the same shit over and over and over again. Katsuo is just this lustful guy who has an honorable side to him, and he's super weak, but he has a secret hidden strength, which is his strong legs he got from playing football and shit. And honestly, there's not much more that I can say about his character, but the main problem is that the supporting cast surrounding Katsuo is also very boring. They're even more boring than he is. You start to realize that the author of this manga was making it with one hand on his erect penis. And it's not like the fan service is particularly interesting or good or fun. It's not like the fun kind of eroticism.
Tenjo Tenge! The only thing I remember from this bullshit anime is that one guy gets actual real martial arts training, and the other guy, who is black, just has to run. His whole training is running because his inherent black genetics. I'm not getting into Japan's racial issues here, though I will say that delinquent manga have a habit of including arcs where our main characters take on American military rejects. When the American is a black guy, it's viewed as extra impressive that a Japanese guy could take him on. This is a thing in sports manga too, which, as we determined at the start of this video, delinquent manga have their roots in. Tenjo Tenge should have probably been a fighting game instead of—
So, you're here as well, are you?
Now just point those tits someplace else. I don't give a damn about those things. I'm telling you, those tits of yours have always been a deadly weapon against me. There's two things in this world that render me powerless: shiitake mushrooms and your tits.
Another Hiroshi Takahashi manga. Not necessarily a part of the Crows Worst continuity, but if you did read Crows beforehand, then this manga has a little bit of a treat for you. This one's unique for a delinquent manga in that it doesn't take place in a school. Well, we do have a few volumes of backstory in a school, but for the most part, this takes place outside a school. It's about a delinquent nicknamed QP, who just got out of a 4-year stint in juvie, and is now just trying to live his life and stay out of trouble. Of course, your past will always catch up to you, no matter how fast you run. It's a story that I felt was equal parts defeatist and optimistic. Fatalistic is the proper word, I think. The idea is that all this shit is inevitable. You can't fix the past, and you can't fix someone you love no matter how much you love them. And sometimes they're not even broken. That's just the way they're meant to be. All you can do is keep your head high, or alternatively down, and walk your own path. QP also reveals that so much of delinquent interactions post-graduation is just meeting up and reminiscing. That's so much of any interaction post-graduation. But these delinquent characters always have this uniquely warm connection. Something worth keeping was forged out of the blood and violence. There's also the implication that little of note has happened in their lives since graduation. They got the action and adventure out of their blood early. There is no place for delinquents in Takahashi's Japan. There is a tragedy to each and every one of his delinquents. The humor and the warmth only serve to highlight the fact that these guys are hopeless, good for nothing, rokudenashi. It's a tone common in delinquent manga, a sort of shogunai attitude, boys will be boys, as if it's pointless to hope for a society that can make it so that they don't become like this. Another manga about a delinquent trying to become a better person is Read! But this one deserves its own video, so I'm not going to talk about it here. Cromartie! It would be oversimplifying it to say that Cromartie parodies delinquent manga. It does that sometimes, but it also just goes off into random gags. The random gags having rarely anything to do with delinquents. Most delinquent manga are parodies of delinquent culture themselves, even when they're played straight. My favorite gags from the show are the Mekazawa gags, the radio joke gag, the bus gag, the transfer student gag, the Putan episode. Wait, hold on, I'm just listing every gag in order. Yeah, no, this show's just funny as fuck. I only have this info from a Discord post on the Wikipedia page, so its validity is certainly to be questioned. But apparently, Cromartie was super inspired by Otoko Ozora, and the characters bore so much resemblance that the mangaka for Otoko Ozora got fan letters assuming that he was the one drawing Cromartie. Fuck! I'm not re-recording that whole sentence, I'm sorry. Holy Land! Which I did not like. I'm sorry, I know this is like the most popular delinquent manga before Tokyo Revengers, but I just could not get into it for the life of me. I will say, I love the central conceit of the story, how it treats the streets themselves as a place worth residing in. Particularly the streets at night as this transient pocket dimension within our world that only delinquents who stake everything on their fists have the right to traverse. But it's also a zero-sum game where you have to metaphysically carve out your space in it by physically fighting other guys. It's because these streets are treated as a finite resource that it's referred to as the titular Holy Land, and it's that reason as well that it's worth fighting for in the first place. If only I wasn't so bored to death by this author's storytelling. I've seen people say Holy Land is good because it's realistic, but realism doesn't inherently make a story good, and even if Holy Land was trying to be realistic, it failed miserably. I didn't expect realism from Holy Land. I try not to expect anything from the art that I walk into. I was ready to take whatever Holy Land offered me, realistic or not. What it offered me was cliché characters and over-explained fights, which could have been fun if the author was also fun. But unfortunately, it takes these paper-thin characters and tries to make them carry such a massive emotional weight that I think it's unfair on them. Buriden Guy! And this one also has an over-explained martial arts mechanic at the beginning, and it becomes irrelevant as soon as the story gets a few chapters in. The main character, Guy Kudo, is a great man on a level with Mankichi, but Guy, special though he may be, doesn't really try to conquer anything or make his name known. He just wants to live self-sufficiently, on his own, away from anyone else. Of course, by the end, he learns that he does need to rely on people to make it through adversity. This is the exact opposite of the lesson Mankichi had to learn. When the priest hung him upside down from a tree—
Okay, so he wasn't upside down, I remembered it wrong.
—and told him to figure out how to get down by himself. Mankichi doesn't really learn this lesson, though the story would have us pretend that he did, because it's only through sheer coincidence that some villain started a fire in the town. So he took advantage of the fire someone else started so he could burn the rope off and get down. But inadvertently, Gaki Daisho makes a point about how limited individual effort is, and how much we rely on each other to escape adversity, whether we realize it or not. Speaking of the Gaki Daisho lineage, you remember that thing I said earlier about a manga that I don't know if I should or should not talk about, and I'll save that one for later? Well, it's late. Kiichi! This snot-nosed, big-eared brat doesn't talk, doesn't laugh, doesn't cry. He always finds himself in the middle of trouble. He keeps making his mother cry. He keeps making her apologize for his behavior. Wanders around the city, getting lost, making his parents worry. Sometimes, at school, he sees somebody do something he doesn't like. In that event, he raises his fist to the sky, as if a proclamation, and then strikes down the injustice. Kiichi, like Mankichi, is destined for greatness in his own right. His origin is mystical in nature, as befits a king. His mother gave birth to him prematurely because a fortune teller told her if he was born on that day, he would become a man of unsurpassed virility. Much like Guy Kudo, he's an outsider to normal society. Kiichi, with his innocent honesty, his unwavering devotion to his principles, and his uncompromising, violent justice, is exactly the kind of man who needs to take the throne over this sick and diseased world. Like many great men, Kiichi is an orphan, but his story begins before he's orphaned. We follow Kiichi from childhood, and the major events that happen in his life are given a lot of time. Just as every single moment is monumental to a young child, so too are they made monumental to you, the reader, following this young child. It would be easy to cover all this in a flashback, but Kiichi the manga is unflinching in revealing to you the enigma of Kiichi the character. This is a very hectic story that's kinda hard to follow, but not in a bad way. It bleeds humanity. This is a real world where things occur independently of our protagonists. Whether we follow things or not, they will happen. The intimacy is uncomfortable at times, as it should be when we're following characters this broken. The adults around Kiichi fail him repeatedly and miserably. These adults, who grew up molded by the same broken world that Kiichi finds himself in, are unable to do anything but screw up and fail him. As a result of their selfishness, neglect, and misbehavior, Kiichi's issues only get worse and worse. Broken things do not know how to mend. First 40 or so chapters actually don't have anything to do with delinquency whatsoever. And the delinquency Kiichi does grow into isn't one of challenging rival schools for control of territory or riding flashy motorcycles with friends. It has similar roots in both of these things, a desire to live life by one's own rules. All these Bosozoku and delinquents follow rules set in place by themselves and their predecessors. In Kamikaze Biker, we see that the play that these delinquents engage in requires rules similar to that of real life, so that they can occupy their desired roles. They reject the monotony and hierarchy of society and instead, ironically, create their own monotony and hierarchy to submit themselves to. At the end of the day, it's nothing of consequence. These guys are playing games just as much as they're playing roles in a play that only they understand. Contrarily, Kiichi refuses to be defined by a framework. His violence is rooted in an undying will to survive. He's not playing a role. He will suffocate to death if he cannot actualize his own goals. His code is not just a set of words, it's the air that he breathes. So long as society forces him to be a part of it, he will stand out like a sore thumb. Kiichi, if it qualifies as a delinquent manga at all, is one that blatantly rejects the disillusionment of delinquents in favor of a more revolutionary spirit, even if it does feel a little bit like a story about a young monarch coming to his throne.
Bakuon Reto! Bro, I shit you not. I wanted to use a Weezer song for this section, so I looked up Weezer Motorcycle, and it gave me the music video for Dope Nose, which has Bosozoku in it, dude. Like, holy, like, bro, I didn't... What a coincidence, man. Dude, like, that's like I just wanted a song where Rivers Cuomo sang about a motorcycle or something. If that even existed, I didn't know. And then there's a music video with the fucking Bosozoku in it, dude. Like, fuck, bro. Like, why are all these HD remastered videos so dog shit? Why do they look like such shit, bro? Like, this is every music video right now. What the fuck's going on?
If you want a manga that very accurately depicts what it was like to be a Bosozoku in the early 80s, look no further than Bakuon Reto, which was made by a mangaka who really was a Bosozoku. By the time I got around to reading Bakuon Reto, I'd already finished reading the Kamikaze Biker sociology book, so every time it showed me something I remembered from the book, I did a truly admirable pog face. The story is simple. It chronologically goes through the main character's progression from a curious middle schooler to a full-fledged Bosozoku member, and also as he becomes more and more of an asshole as his insecurities expand. This is one of the very few delinquent manga where the main character's parents are actually present in the story, and their decisions affect his life significantly. It's generally too much of a pain in the ass to include parents as characters if your goal is to be entertaining in a delinquent manga. But Bakuon Reto's goal isn't necessarily entertainment. That's not me knocking it, although I didn't find it to be the most engaging manga necessarily. I was mainly surprised at the details, from the fact that guys recognize each other more from the bikes they ride than their names, to the whole senpai-kohai conflict diffuser, to the biker magazines reaching out to them to do photo shoots and write articles, to the hatred bikers have for surfers, to all the bike trading and license paperwork, to how meetups are organized, to the difficulty in keeping unmotivated guys in the club, and the reasons they have to be so persistent, to how gangs respond to the mass arrests of their members, to the paint thinner huffing, to the way values shift from generation to generation, to the new traffic laws put in place in the early 80s discouraging Bosozoku activity, to the pressure Yakuza members might put on Bosozoku guys to get involved in that life, to the descent of the main character into becoming a sex criminal and potential rapist, to all the guys who die in traffic accidents, to the High Teen Boogie reference. Bakuon Reto really shows the mundanity of Bosozoku life. It's a boring manga, not necessarily in a pejorative way, but more so with the way it introduces and resolves conflicts, and the way the repetitive nature of Bosozoku life mirrors the repetitive nature of life for normal citizens, although with different parameters. Though Bosozoku may try to escape the mundanity of life, it will find them at the end of the day. By the time I finished the manga, the author vindicated my feelings in the afterword. If there's anything I learned from Bakuon Reto, it's that the kamikaze spirit required to live life as a Bosozoku is not a sustainable spirit to have. Better that you mold your spirit into something more malleable, or else find it molded for you by some greater and less considerate hand.
Midori Days!
I could waste both of our valuable time using words to describe why Midori Days is boring, but I'd rather use those words to talk about a different slice of life rom-com that's also barely a delinquent manga.
School Rumble!
I also barely want to talk about this one, even though it's actually really good. The English dub surprised me. I actually like Tenma's English VA more than her Japanese VA.
If that's the case...
Miko, it's watermelon time! Let's cut the watermelon open and eat it! We're gonna make a curry! Make
There's also a moment that really stood out to me where the male lead saves the female lead from danger, but instead of her falling in love with him, he falls in love with her. This is a great deal more accurate. Delinquents and the guys who project themselves onto them love girls who are savable and save-worthy. In a normal delinquent manga, she'd fall in love with him after he saved her. But what actually ends up happening is that Harima almost sexually assaults her while she's passed out. He thinks better of it and tries to stop, but her unconscious arms, like the arms of judgment, frees him in his moment of entitlement. The ones who project themselves onto those old delinquent characters are more like Harima here, feeling entitled to a woman's body and affection as a result of saving her. She wakes up, sees what the deal is, and gets out of there. He is the one left with the feelings, not her. Gang King! One of the strongest guys in this manga walks around with a vibrator that he uses to threaten people with sexual assault. There are gangs named shit like bulimia and sodomy. Not Bosozoku gangs, just school gangs, but Bosozoku actually had a lot of weird names, and that ties into their image. They enjoyed a creative use of kanji to make weird English words. Shit like Black Emperor, Don Quixote, Funky Boys, Dracula, Tarantula, Popeye, Ann Lewis, Hitler. But that's enough about Bosozoku. Gang King is about a guy who wants to be a tattoo artist, but it slowly becomes more about him being a delinquent boss. Personally, I was way more interested in the tattoo story. I like stories that have a lot of disparate parts that they try to combine together, and the idea of a tattoo artist apprentice who's also a delinquent boss is pretty interesting to me, but this is yet another delinquent manga with overly simplistic morals that completely misses the point of what makes delinquents cool. But I wouldn't say it's like terrible or anything. It's certainly not nearly as bad as Hallelujah or Bad Boys. I think this story's main character, Jimmy, being the strongest guy in school and one of the strongest guys in the city, is a bad character trait. A lot of delinquent stories make the main character the strongest. Sometimes it can work. In Crows, it works because Boya Harumichi is like delinquent Paddington, going around changing the lives of everyone he beats the shit out of. Not out of any moral imperative, but because of the metaphysical power of his fists, which only contain their power because of his wayward and free-spirited character. In Gang King and Hallelujah, the main character being so strong only serves to overshadow all the other characters. Jimmy is kind of Mary Sue-ish in a similar way to Yosuke Eguchi, but Eguchi is a way more fun character surrounded by a way more fun cast of characters. Eguchi is charismatic, mischievous, a cross between an immature boy and a mature man. A perfect combo of Koha and Nanpa for a Mary Sue delinquent in sunny 80s Japan. Just as Eguchi can be seen as a proto-Harumichi, he can also be seen as a proto-Mitsuhashi. He has layers. Eguchi might overshadow his side characters to some extent by being so good at everything he does, but he really does feel like the main character of a series of pulp novels like John Carter or Tarzan, but way more fun. Jimmy, comparatively, is very boring. He can't carry a story the way Eguchi can. There's no star power. Eguchi is Hulk Hogan. Jimmy is, I don't know, the Great Khali? Jimmy also gets all the girls, and there's several pages dedicated to describing the magnificent perfection of his penis. So I think it's fair to say the author went a little overboard dick riding this nigga. Itoshi no Bancho!
I scrubbed through everything I had to say about this one, and there was nothing of value. It's like, kind of funny. It's kind of funny. The romance doesn't work, because the guy is so boring. You can read this one if you want.
Nanba MG5! Nanba Tsuyoshi is a delinquent from a family of delinquents, much like Elite Yankee Saburo, which we didn't cover because only one chapter is translated. Tsuyoshi has huge expectations on his shoulders. He conquered 14 schools in middle school, and now he's about to enter the most vile delinquent high school there is. His family wants him to rule Japan, much like the delinquents of old, but Tsuyoshi has different goals. He wants to be an artist, like that dumbass kid from Hallelujah. He has no interest in fighting or conquering schools or anything like that. So he enrolls in the normal school just across the street from the delinquent school and tries to be a normal kid. And thus begins the double life of Nanba Tsuyoshi, who has to hide his normal high schooler self from his parents, while also hiding his delinquent self from his classmates. This becomes difficult with his sense of justice, which causes him to defend people as a delinquent hero dressed in outdated tokofuku and a mask to conceal his identity. I'm a huge fan of superhero comics, or as they're referred to today, cape shit, so I'm a major sucker for the whole secret identity gimmick in this story. I think it solves a major issue while also raising some questions about the nature of delinquent comics. So many of the manga we've discussed have an overwhelming need to make their main characters be warriors of justice while at the same time being delinquents. This is, according to Kamikaze Biker, the way delinquents best like to picture themselves, as a picaro, a roguish warrior in the margins of society. But so many of these manga end up doing something different. They make their characters heroes entirely. What better way to do this than to have your delinquent character straight up be a hero with a secret identity? stupidity. Nanba Tsuyoshi basically has an on-off button, but instead of switching from delinquent to hero, he switches from being a normal kid to a delinquent hero combo. There's irony in the fact that, in order to enforce justice against the villainous delinquents who hurt his friends, he has to dress up like a delinquent himself. He does dress up as a very old-fashioned delinquent in his Tokofuku, and maybe the story is trying to say something by that the delinquents of old were honorable, and the delinquents of now are without that virtue. It would be a false assertion to make, but I wouldn't read too deeply into that aspect of it. If you're wondering why Tsuyoshi can't fight for justice with his mask off, it's not like these guys are supervillains who are gonna kidnap his family. Shit, this guy's family is stronger than he is. The reason is simple. It's that if you fight at all, you're seen as violent.
But
the story presents violence as one of the only viable solutions in these situations. And although Tsuyoshi has no love for violence, it's the only thing he knows how to use. So he disguises himself to protect his reputation as a peaceable guy, especially for the girl he has a crush on, who, like many love interests in delinquent manga, is a non-delinquent girl who hates violence under any circumstances, even in the defense of another person. It's the kind of character trait that creates tension in a relationship with any delinquent-minded main character. We even get a Zoro-type situation where the love interest, Fujita, despite her dislike of violence, finds herself enraptured by Tsuyoshi's delinquent alter ego. In Zoro, it's more so that Lolita actively dislikes Don Diego's bloodless lifelessness, and she's directly attracted to Zoro's aggressive, purposeful nature. Contrary-wise, with Fujita, she says that she hates violence, but it turns out she's very attracted to a guy who is very violent. I don't think this is trying to come to any incel conclusions. I think it's just trying to be funny about it. If only this thing was fully translated, then I'd get to see how it ends! Doesn't matter to me whether he's gay or not. You used to hate gays with a passion. Oh, man. One thing I don't like about this story, and I'm fully open to having missed something in my initial reading, is that sometimes characters will just do things that make no sense for them to do. I'm not saying characters have to act logically and rationally always. I'm just saying, why does Cindy here agree to accompany this traitor to the mansion of a murderous rape gangster for literally no reason? Like, she doesn't have anything she wants to do over there, nothing she wants to get, nothing she wants to say, she just goes. Did the author forget to write her dialogue where she explains this baffling decision, or did I miss something? I'm totally open to having missed something in my mind, like maybe I accidentally skipped a page, or maybe in the version that I was reading, a page was missing. It seems that she went there just to get held hostage to increase the stakes for the fight. Wait, no. Ozawa-sensei, don't call your knockoff Nikes that. No, Ozawa-sensei, don't change that letter, no!
Yankee-kun Tomegane-chan!
Remember what I said back in the day about the delinquent guy, studious girl dynamic? This is an entire manga about that. Psych! You thought because she has glasses that she's a studious girl who hates violence like every other female lead in a delinquent manga, right? Right? Well, you're not entirely wrong. She is studious. She's just also an idiot. And a former delinquent. This manga is pretty funny for the entirety of its run, but it's at its funniest in the first 40 or 50 chapters, when it's completely focused on the episodic shenanigans. After a while, it starts to introduce those sappier elements that turn me off of most comedies. But so many comedy stories overdose on the sentimentality, and it interferes with their ability to stay funny. I really like Yankee-kun's development over the course of the story. Yankee-kun is much more the main character compared to Megane-chan, who, after the first few dozen chapters, ends up kinda taking a back seat, which is a real shame because Megane-chan is one of the funniest characters ever made. And let me not underrate YNM's action. This right here is a mangaka that really knows how to make her characters move. For some reason, most of my notes on this manga are criticisms about how dragged out it gets towards the end and how it does not pay off whatsoever in the finale. But I don't want to focus on that because I actually do like most of the manga. I think the story deserves more words praising it than criticizing it, at least from me in proportion to how I feel about it. You're not gonna guess how many trips the main cast goes on. Forget a Kyoto field trip. These guys go on the equivalent of a fucking tour of Japan. This is a must-read for delinquent completionists, if only because it seems to have inspired like a dozen copycats. Stuff like Modokidamo, whose central premise is like YNM mixed with Keikao, but also it's not as good as either of them. Or Incho to Furio-kun, which didn't really land for me at all. Of the delinquent x Megane class rep subgenre, YNM reigns supreme.
Drop!
If you're like me and you've read damn near every single delinquent manga that came out before the year of 2007, then the beginning of Drop will floor you. It's about a guy who's tired of his life as a normal student and one day decides to be a delinquent. Wait, haven't we been here before? But this guy specifically is inspired by the manga he loves, which is so many of the manga that we just went over. In chapter 1, he lists his inspirations, and only one of them is a manga that we haven't gone over, Hey Riki, which is actually Hiroshi Takahashi's first manga, which got cancelled when its magazine, Shonen Comics, got cancelled in its totality. In 2004, it got renewed with Takahashi's former assistant Koichi Nagata taking looking over. It ran for 31 volumes, so it pains me to say that we haven't gotten a single chapter in English as far as I've searched. But back to Drop. The setup of a bored high school kid being inspired by his favorite delinquent manga to drop out of private school is a fun one, and it could have gone anywhere. I mean, for fuck's sake, the first chapter ends with its prospective final page as a page in a manga magazine, the same kind of magazine that our main character is obsessed with, and a main character, mind you, who has the same name with a minor difference as the writer of the story. So what do we get? A pretty good action manga. Suzuki Dai's art will mesmerize you. By the time you finish reading this manga, you will have read a pretty good action manga. These are some of the most striking panels in all of delinquent manga. Am I wrong for feeling a little disappointed? After reading so much delinquent manga, I thought I was finally getting something groundbreaking. Instead, it's just more of the same. It's done pretty well. We don't have that bullshit good delinquent versus bad delinquent baggage, just guys fighting. And the fights all have this sort of pro wrestling fighting game logic that makes them more compelling than the average delinquent fight. But man, I really got my hopes up, and I feel a little bit guilty for that. But it's not like I got my expectations up based on some external thing, like the movie or the novel it was adapted from or some social media post. I got my expectations up based on the first chapter of the manga itself. So even though it is still a pretty good action manga, the fights are really cool. I don't want to convince you that this is somehow a bad manga. No, this is a good manga. If you go into it looking for some good, solid action, you're not going to be disappointed. But man, I was really excited for a meta delinquent manga, man. That's just exciting to me. Like, the first chapter excited me so much, and the rest of it was like just normal good, man. I don't know. Like, it just feels weird to be like saying this, man. I don't know. And this isn't the first time I've gotten my hopes up for a delinquent manga only for it to disappoint me. Neither the Drop sequel manga nor the prequel manga are available in English. But the prequel manga, notably, is about the deuteragonist of Drop, Tatsuya Iguchi. It's also written by a real guy named Tatsuya Iguchi, who would later go on to write We're going out of chronological order for this, but I might as well get this manga out of the way now. Out starts off as a pretty good manga. It's about a guy named Tetsuya Iguchi, not Tatsuya Iguchi. So I don't know why people are acting like this is a sequel to Drop. Shit, maybe it is. I haven't seen the other sequel to Drop, so I can't really say. Either way, I like the way it starts out. Tetsuya just got out of juvie, and his only goal is to stay out of trouble. But unlike QP, who's perfectly content with his new life and whose main conflict comes from his past, Tetsuya's past is long behind him. His main conflict is his blood. He has yet to grow out of his violent tendencies. So Out starts off as a comedy slice-of-life drama about a delinquent just trying to become a former delinquent so he doesn't waste the opportunity he was given by his aunt, who's letting him work at her restaurant. Over time, we get introduced to the delinquents in this area, a bunch of Bosozoku getting into gang wars over territory and shit like that. Remember when I said Bosozoku don't do this shit for profit? This is a hobby. It costs more money than it generates. Sometimes these guys force their underlings to sell gang merch for money, but only to use that money on their motorcycles and cars. Yakuza will sometimes try to recruit them, as we saw in Bakuan Retto, but it was an overwhelmingly unpopular life path for Bosozoku to go down. This right here is the graph with the dotted line showing the less likely life path and the unbroken line showing the more likely life path. I also remember the story from Kamikaze Biker where this one Bosozoku kid had a dad who was a Yakuza, and when asked if he would take on the family business when he grew up, he responded strongly with a no. And I think when Ikuya Sato checked up on him later, he really stayed true to his word. You remembered wrongly. If I were to speculate, I think it's because of the fundamental difference in principles between Bosozoku and Yakuza. The Bosozoku of Out, however, are quite the contrary. They aren't hobbyists so much as they are junior gangsters. They have underworld ties to Yakuza and Nigerian gangsters and run entire criminal enterprises for them. We see a little bit of these characters' interest in motorcycles, but for the most part, these guys are in it for the money. I understand why the author did this. It's to raise the stakes, to add weight, tension, suspense. It's not entirely a bad idea. And Out had a real opportunity to make some great points about delinquency. I mentioned this before, but we only assign the value we do to these delinquent stories because they're juvenile. And juvenility is transient. Ikuya Sato describes the world of Bosozoku as being a liminal one, a period where the desire to act out and the ability to get away with acting out intersect, creating this pocket dimension where all sorts of other culture and expression can be emphasized. Let me read these passages from Kamikaze Biker so that we can just understand what Ikuya Sato's trying to say directly. In several ways, the Bosozoku is depicted as a liminal being who transcends the structural principles of society and who is, or should be, beyond the conventional rules. He even reproaches the conventional, non-Bosozoku world for its hypocrisy. This common theme of liminality is similar to the image of the Picaro, as a marginal man who exploits and makes permanent the liminal state of being betwixt and between all fixed points in a status sequence. The liminal character of Bosozoku and their immunity from social rules are often associated with seishun, the word Japanese use when they idealize and romanticize adolescence. The instant you start to bring that into adulthood, with adulthood's concerns and responsibilities, it will instantly be bastardized, corrupted most likely by the profit motive, if not something else. If these Bosozoku were legitimate gangs in the way street gangs are here in America, things would probably be a lot uglier. And Out does kinda deliver on that. I was really excited to see how a story about a guy who struggles to keep his blood under control would fare in a world where delinquency carries the weight that it does here. That is until the story devolved into Bosozoku Kimura Antark. And believe me, the writer is no Yoshihiro Togashi. I don't know what it is, man. Not only does Tetsuya, my favorite character, completely disappear for this arc, but I'm also not completely sold on how this world works. Like, these superpowered delinquents with their strange weapons and abilities all fighting in a chop shop owned by a Nigerian gangster hidden away in the woods. Like, there's nothing inherently wrong with the things that I just said. It's just, I got my hopes up for a story about a guy learning to become a better person in a delinquent Bosozoku context. And now that guy's not even here. Once again, I have loved many stories that have changed their scope, but a love for this story evades me. And I think it was when I was reading a 2-volume-long backstory in the middle of an already volume-long fight about a character whose name I could barely remember and who had virtually no page time beforehand that I realized we were never getting that original story back. And while the manga has yet to conclude, I highly doubt that it's going to end in a way that brings me back around on it. And that's fine. People seem to like it, and I understand why. Me personally, I don't think the author has quite the finesse that is required for such a tremendous undertaking. There were a lot more criticisms I had to say for Out, but to avoid repeating myself too much, I'll just save those words for a manga more deserving of them. I promise, I'm not trying to be a contrarian with these opinions. It brings me no joy to dislike things that everyone else likes. I want to be on board. I want to see what you guys see in the One Piece live action series. I'm saying this now because I'm just realizing how popular the manga are that I've publicly disliked in this video, and I don't want it to come across like I'm disliking them for being popular. Plenty of popular things. Dragon Ball is my favorite thing of all time. One Piece is like a close second. I watched the last Spider-Verse movie 6 times in theaters. Clover! This one took a while to grow on me. It gets off to a rough start, being pretty generic. Main character's the strongest guy, each arc is about him beating up a bad delinquent, and that pretty much doesn't change for the entirety of the story. The main reason you'll be reading this is everything else. It may not start out very funny, but it definitely gets funnier as it goes on. Slowly, the mangaka realizes what his characters are about, and he finds the humor and the nuance in their interactions. My main problem with this one is that it never surprises me. Well, it certainly surprises me with the fits. This guy has a real eye for fashion. Like, look at her. She has my favorite fits, and because she shows up later in the manga, she ends up wearing jerseys from 2012-ish to 2014-ish, which was the time in my life when I was watching the most football. I'm a bit distraught at the fact that she has 2 national team jackets and neither one is her own national team, but it's okay. Remember when Rooney was so good he was in Ballon d'Or talks and on the cover of every FIFA? She has Rooney's England jacket too. I guess she's a legit fan. I think that's a Balotelli Italy shirt. Man, I miss that guy. It is a Balotelli shirt / jacket. My main problem is that a few volumes later, we see her wearing Balotelli's Why Always Me shirt. He had that shirt when he was playing for Man City, but I thought she was a Man U fan. Is this mangaka just looking up football merch on Google Images and throwing whatever he finds on these characters? And now she's a Bayern fan too? Number 7, what is that, Ribery? Yeah? I think this chapter came out in the season they won the treble. Here we see a Sharawi jersey, which, hey, at least this guy isn't glory hunting. Juventus was the one winning all the Serie A's back to back in those days. I remember being so pissed Sharawi didn't have 5-star skills in FIFA 13. I really thought he was that good. He kinda was, and kinda still is. This guy fights in a Sharawi jersey, and it's so surreal to see. I can't wrap my head around it. This is a shirt I've only seen on Egyptian guys. And even then, it was Egyptian guys of 10 years ago. And now I'm seeing it in a delinquent manga, in a chapter that was released 10 years ago, but still. And also, as far as mangaka go, Tetsuhiro Hirakawa might just be the best at drawing braids and dreads. Like, what the fuck is going on in Out? But aside from all that, there's never a point where I was particularly impressed. Every time the story came close to asking an interesting question or examining something I thought was worthwhile, it ended up devolving into the only thing the author knew how to do. A fight. I know it sounds weird to complain about that. It is an action manga after all. The fights aren't bad. If you want a very standard 2000s delinquent manga, I guess I'll recommend this, but I can't say that you'll be blown away. It's a lot like Hallelujah in its setups, but I'll give it the credit of being more readable than that shit. Even if you haven't read a single delinquent manga, Clover will probably still just feel like more of the same. Every arc is the same thing over and over again. It's weird because I found Clover a very easy manga to read. It's very briskly paced. There's not a lot of dialogue per page. Most of your time is going to be spent admiring the pretty good art. The problem is that, to the same extent that it is easy to read and easy to finish, it is also pretty unremarkable. This manga is like candy to me. It is like the candy of delinquent manga, and I'm never going to complain about candy.
Kongo Bancho!
Unfortunately, I now have to read something by the guy who made 7 Deadly Sins. Thankfully, it's a lot better than 7 Deadly Sins. For coming out in 2007, it really feels like a classic battle manga. And I'm not just talking about the homage it pays to Akira Miyashita's classic Big Men. It's also in the political undertones and overtones, in the ridiculousness of the battles, in the way the 5-on-5 match works here that's different from the way Clover or Drop did theirs, with all these gimmicks and powers and shit. It resembles way more closely Otokojuku's team fights. The story's about a plot from the government to hold a secret Bancho tournament where the winner rules Japan. Kongo Bancho is a classically stoic Miyashita big man, similar to Skullcap Masa and Momotaro. The story's about as political as you would expect, or actually probably more political than you would expect. Here, Japan is a festering mess. In order for the nation to be reborn in the image that it deserves, it needs an absolute ruler of astounding charisma and leadership. A man amongst men. A classic, old-fashioned Bancho. Our main character, Kongo, rejects this notion and aims to destroy those in charge of this competition. This isn't to say Kongo isn't conservative. He is, only not necessarily in an overbearing or authoritarian way, but rather in a southern gentlemanly kind of way, or whatever the Japanese equivalent of that is. He sees women scantily clad and puts his gigantic coat over all of them and tells them to value themselves more. It's well-meaning and only becomes overbearing on a meta level, when the story keeps throwing problems at Kongo Bancho to solve in order to teach the audience very basic and unconvincing lessons. Like this one, where this neat kid is abusing his parents and acting like a disgusting fucking animal, and Kongo Bancho intervenes to turn him into a good person again. Most chapters are not bullshit like that. Most of the story is action. Kongo will swing cars around like they're made of paper. Such is the nature of his manhood. He demonstrates strength that puts him all the way at the top of the strength hierarchy. One of my favorite moments in this manga is in chapter 20, which shows us the Sasori Bancho, the former second-generation leader of a Sukeban gang. Sasori means scorpion, and she debuts singing Flower of Carnage, a song by Kaji Meiko, who played female prisoner Scorpion. This reference made me soy face. The Doke Bancho might be my favorite, while it lasts, just because I love clown characters. Or maybe the Iai Bancho is my favorite. If you like Ultimate Path, Geki, Otokojuku, or Oscar Tebu, you'll probably like this one. But honestly, I also want to say that if you like JoJo's, Rurouni Kenshin, or Yu-Gi-Oh!, you'll like this as well. I don't know why, but those are the 3 manga I was thinking about the most when I was reading Kongo Bancho.
Wolf Guy!
I read this manga like 6 or 7 years ago, and I can only remember 2 things.
Number 1!
I like this character, and
Number 2!
There is so much rape. Like an insane amount of rape. And also I'm remembering some well-drawn fight scenes, you know, some like decent blood and gore and shit. But most of all, just an unreasonable amount of rape. I don't feel like rereading it to refresh myself on the materials.
Barry Hackett!
One of the best comedies of misunderstandings you'll ever read. It's about an otaku nerd who accidentally becomes perceived as a bancho and goes around helping his school clubs. Kind of like Chuji Akagi from Yuyake Bancho, except all of these clubs are fucking ridiculous. The hula hoop racing club, sitting on a toilet club, penis fishing club. I think Barry Haken properly carries Yuyake Bancho's torch. The panels are so crammed with jokes and information that it gets kind of hard to read at times with how crunchy the scan is.
Onidare!
And
Yandere Kanojo!
These are basically 2 different manga with the exact same premise. A delinquent girl boss has a nerdy boyfriend that she has to hide from all her friends. I previously had like 5 minutes discussing why I thought Yandere Kanojo is better, but honestly it's difficult to put into words. Onidare is just more repetitive, bland, like I don't know man, like I don't need to spend that much time discussing it, just know that Yandere Kanojo is way better.
Crows Lady!
I love the idea of gender-bending crows, but why did they have to give them superpowers? That was completely unnecessary. And why did they only adapt random moments from the original manga? I would have read a full recreation of gender-bent crows, and I'm not even kidding. Seeing Boya Harumichi and Yasuo being the way they are here fucking rules, man. Anyways, my favorite girl is Zetta.
Beelzebub!
I'm astonished at how little I have to say about this one. It's weird, this is one of the most popular delinquent manga of all time, but because of the way I went about doing the research for this video, I was too burnt out on delinquent manga to make it very far into this one. Like, I was watching the anime on the side while making it through a bunch of other manga, but the anime is so bad. Like, it looks like shit and it doesn't really do the manga's comedy justice. But as funny as the manga can be, it's not even close to About! If there's a manga I want to sing the praises of in this video, it's About. As far as action manga go, this one's okay, but as far as comedies go, this one's among the best. Not just in delinquent manga, in manga. It's been over a month since I finished it, and I still remember jokes from it that make me laugh my ass off in public. The main character, Asagiri, is like Boya Harumichi, a strong guy transferring to a new delinquent school. Asagiri, however, is far more ambitious. He actively wants to take over the school. He's also a complete fucking idiot. These two make one of the funniest duos in manga history. If this manga wasn't as funny as it was, I'd be tearing into it for being another lackluster delinquent action manga. But I can barely remember most of the action, while I can remember all of the jokes, so in my memory this is a damn near perfect story. It's a shame it only ran for as long as it did, and the sequel only ran for like 40 chapters. There's also a manga called About Surf, but I can't find it in English at all. I want to talk so much about this manga, but I don't want to spoil any of the jokes, so there's not much more I can say other than singing praises of how funny it is and forcing you guys to read it. If you liked Clover, you'll probably like this one more. The fights are about the same quality, maybe About's are even better than Clover's fights. But About is also funnier and has no female characters, so no damsel in distress bullshit over here. Hello, it's me again, the guy you've been hearing in the video the whole time. This is what, the halfway point? I just want to... Oh, no, this is not the halfway point. Oh my god, holy shit. I just want to quickly let you know that I made a Patreon. Wait, listen. I'm not begging. I swear. I want to make it very clear. I don't need the money. I just want the money. I don't have any grand expectations for this, but a few extra dollars per month would definitely help out a lot. I also want to be clear, this isn't just for the videos. I have plans to make a lot of things. Books, short stories, other projects that I don't want to promise here because I don't want to make any promises about things that may not come to fruition. I want to be very wise about the things that I announce and the things that I keep under wraps. I just have a lot I want to do, and I want to be perfectly transparent and let prospective donators know that if you only like my videos and nothing else, that whatever money you will potentially give will assist me for everything and not just this one thing. I also wanted to put this here because a lot of what I discuss after this point is just me being a hater about some fairly popular manga. So on the chance that you're considering donating but you're also a fan of one or more of the manga that I'll be discussing after this point, please donate now before you change your mind. Sugarless! The whole idea of this delinquent school is that the strongest guy gets to put his name on a flag and tie it to the windmill on the top of the school. Why does the school have a windmill on it? I have no idea. But I like it. I don't imagine it was inspired by real life. It has the feeling of something the author saw in a dream and felt the need to include in their story. I find the surreal aspect to be compelling. The manga is not just about a windmill on top of a school. This is really just a standard delinquent action manga where the main character's ambition is to be at the top of the school. Gone are the days of the guys who just were top of the school and had to deal with the conflicts outside of that or because of that. Now is the age of guys with ambitions to be the top of the school, and all conflict is related to that. I guess there's a point to be made here. The modern age of delinquents is chasing what the previous age was able to acquire very effortlessly. Kinda. The 60s and 70s showed us men who strove to refine their manhood, and as a result, acquired followers of men who were so moved by their manliness, thus becoming bancho. The 80s showed us men who were banchos as a matter of fact, who did not necessarily strive to refine their manhood either because it was already refined or because that wasn't really a concern for the characters, or both. 2000s and 2010s are showing us guys who want to become bancho again, but becoming bancho used to be a byproduct of having a refined manhood back in the 60s all the way through the 90s, whereas here in Sugarless and in About, it is a thing to strive towards in and of itself. I don't really have that much to say about Sugarless. It's just a manga about guys fighting, and it draws these guys fighting very well. On a narrative level, I'm not 100% compelled. I don't think this Naruto-style goal and motivation for the main character translates that well into a delinquent manga. I think it could, given a little bit more work, a little bit more writing, but as it is, it's pretty thin. It's kind of shallow, but it's fine, because, I mean, it's very well-drawn action, and that's what you're here for. It's basically the same as Clover. I don't like discussing art in these terms, but I would say that the characters aren't as well written as Clover's, but it has better action. It's not gonna blow your mind, neither story will challenge you in any way, or reveal to you something new or interesting about what they're talking about. These are the kinds of stories you go to if you're looking for more of the same. Stuff that was done better in manga of the past, but you already read those ones and you want some more stuff. Genki go to Juku! This is a story that actually tries to grapple with what it would mean to be a delinquent in modern-day Japan. Now, I've never been to modern-day Japan, I've only ever been to Meiji-era Japan, so I can't really say how well this story does at conveying these sorts of emotions and ideas to a Japanese person in the modern day. But as a delinquent manga expert, I can say this story moved me. It presents the unflinching cruelty of disillusioned youths in all its disgusting splendor, the shit-eating joy these guys take in humiliating each other, now with cell phones instead of camcorders, the loss of innocence when you see what's on the other side of the barrier between middle school and high school, how things come into focus in a way that makes everything go sour. It's all just more of the same and maybe a little bit worse. But I think the manga's also about the things you might gain when you finally let innocence go. I'm always ready to admit when I'm reading too much into a work of art, but seeing a story get so up close to its characters in such a short amount of time reminded me of Blue Spring, a less surreal, more optimistic work of art than Blue Spring, but still something that aims to tell you more than just a story about a guy who punches hard. And don't get me wrong, I love a story about a guy who punches hard, but it seems that the ones who wrote those stories best did them best in a different time. And now, with culture changing, we need stories about guys who punch differently. And also, don't get me wrong on the other side either. Ikarishi, the main character of this manga, still punches hard. The thing that interests me the most about Ikarishi is how he communicates. A very silent guy, easily misunderstood because he doesn't like to use words, more apt to communicate with his fists rather than his tongue. But what you might not know from looking at him is that he's a very verbose texter. He actually has a lot that he would like to say, he just finds it easier to communicate through text. SWAT! You can tell why this one got canceled. The only question is why it didn't get canceled earlier. If you want to hear people actually talk about it, there's a podcast out there that validated all of my feelings that you are only allowed to watch once you have finished my video. And now, a moment of silence for all the ones I didn't really see a way to discuss, either because they weren't available enough or because I didn't give a fuck.
Or because I don't feel like editing so much.
There's some stuff that I neglected to talk about. Stuff like the whole deal with the swastika and Bosozoku symbolism. Sometimes it's the manji, sometimes it's that Nazi inverted swastika. I don't know if Bosozoku themselves make the distinction, but Bosozoku enjoy an aesthetic alignment with things that are frightening and authoritarian, as well as things that are beautiful and harmonious. I already mentioned a Bosozoku gang named Hitler, but there's also gangs named after flowers and butterflies and shit. There's also the whole deal with uniform modifications that I didn't talk about. Delinquents like to elongate the pants on their school uniforms, you might have noticed. Sometimes they also elongate the jackets, but sometimes they shorten them. A shortened jacket, I've learned, is called a tanran, which you can see on Mitsuhashi, or my Kenka Bancho character. Of the manga and anime that are scrolling around right now that I neglected to talk about, the ones that I regret not talking about the most are Akamatsu 7, which is a boys love manga that I really liked, but I figured it might fit better in a boys love delinquent video, that I'm not promising to make, by the way. Ongaku R Sound, which is a pretty good movie, but I just don't have that many words to say about it. Fudatsuki no Kyoko-chan, a pretty fun manga, but doesn't have that much to do with delinquents at all. Delinquent Housewife, which I really liked a lot, but all I'd be talking about is how hot the girl is. Toraku Amari Kawashita Damedayo, which was honestly kind of funny. Funnier than I expected, at least. Nyankees, but what am I gonna say about Nyankees, man? I mean, it's whatever. Like, once the novelty wears off, there's not really much to say. Rokudo no Onnatachi, but honestly, it would have been just more of me shitting on an anime. And there's 2 anime/manga that I'm gonna be shitting on right up ahead. And that's about it. Tokyo Revengers! You can say a lot about Tokyo Revengers making certain points about juvenility and adulthood and the transition and keeping delinquent activities where they belong in that phase of your life, and similar stuff to Out with the whole bastardization of Bosozoku culture with, you know, like all that. You can get into that, but I wouldn't, because I still don't think Tokyo Revengers is very good. To explain why I think it's so bad, I would have to get into issues that begin from chapter 1 and perpetuate or intensify by the final chapter. Does anyone really want me to spend that much time explaining why I think Tokyo Revengers is irredeemable trash? No, of course not. So I guess I'll just mention some small things that irritated me. Why does every tattooed character look like they all went to the same tattoo artist? Even the guy from Brazil has the same shitty-ass style of tattoo on him. These are the kinds of tattoos someone who has never seen a tattoo in his life would draw. It's the kind of design you'd see in the margins of a 12-year-old's notebook while they're doodling in class. I can't knock it too much because this is a story for 12-year-olds, but I can't help but think that we do children a disservice disservice by not giving them better things, better art, better stories. Like, the tattoo situation is emblematic of a much larger problem within the story, which is that the author is so completely unconcerned with his characters that there's nothing interesting about any of them, visually or otherwise. You couldn't think farther than this Pinterest mood board bullshit? But hey, it's not like the tattooed characters are the only ones who are one-dimensional. It's not like the non-tattooed characters are doing so much better. The main character's girlfriend is a perfect girlfriend who loves him no matter what. There's nothing else that you can reasonably say about her. What, she's a good student? Come on, get fucking real, man. This is not a character. But don't worry, I'm not being misogynistic. There are no characters in Tokyo Revengers, male or female. It's a story full of walking paper cutouts. Every antagonist is an evil-eyed, smiling psychopath. And you better hope the story doesn't tell you their motivations. Because when a character does have motivations, it's always the stupidest shit you've ever heard in your life. Oh, you're evil because you had a crush on a girl? You're evil because your mom died? You're evil because this fantasy superpower is secretly forcing you to be evil? None of the things I've said are inherently bad. I'm pretty sure all of these have been done well in the past because art has no rules and everything you do is based on execution. The pathos, the care that you put into the thing you're making. But that's exactly it. The author is so uninterested in giving his characters layers, so uninterested in giving his characters a personality that everything you see is as paper thin as it looks on first glance. The author is so uninterested in writing his characters beyond the basic stock template that he bases them all off of. Whatever information you're given about a character will never serve to deepen them, to complicate them. Backstory is no substitute for personality. Somehow, learning the reasons that these characters are evil makes them feel even more shallow than they did when I didn't know their motivations at all, at least before I could speculate. I could wonder, why is this guy so irrationally evil? I could perhaps imagine he's a sort of Shakespearean villain like Don John or fucking Aaron from Titus Andronicus. I might have reason to believe that these guys are interesting. And you replace that with what? The guy had a crush on a girl? The guy's mom died? There was evil magic, dude? Is that it? Seriously? Like, man, let me have something. And like, man, Takemichi, the main character, his primary trait is his resilience. His entire character is based around how hard he can get beat down and how many times he can get back up again. This can be interesting. Maybe, because he's so weak, he has to overcome his obstacles in a different way. Maybe he has to learn to be smarter, more strategic. Maybe we could go the simpler way and just have him train to get stronger. That could work. Or maybe he never gets stronger and never gets smarter, but his resilience manifests itself in interesting, unique, creative, and sometimes humorous ways. There's an infinite number of paths we can go down. The author chose to go down the path where Takemichi keeps getting bailed out of problems by having a stronger character show up to save him. Almost always as a function of his luckiness, never as a function of who he is as a person. I don't know, man, maybe it's a good thing that this story, which is trying to fill me with a sense of tension and suspense, and yet which is completely devoid of any characters which I could possibly feel any suspense for, and the main guy on our side can just one-shot the main antagonist whenever he wants. I'm really puzzled as to why Tokyo Revengers fans are so mad at the way the story ended. You were never promised good writing. The author of this story has taken the path of least resistance from start to finish without fail. So why does it surprise you that this ending is so cowardly, so spineless, when it comes from a story that has been that way the entire time? There's moments where you'll think there might be something interesting to discuss, like when it turns out Takemichi became morally corrupt after a decade of not going back to meet the detective guy, or the whole situation with these two guys. Those are the only two ideas from the story that I can recall being interesting in any way, and yet the author was totally uninterested in exploring them further. Shit, the entire premise of the story, a washed-up ex-delinquent wage slave goes back in time to the golden age of delinquents. The guy's about 2 decades off, but it's okay. Interesting premise. What conversation does it want to have? At best, Tokyo Revengers decides to do the equivalent of buying a last-minute Hallmark card to tell you that it will all be okay. Everything can be fixed. In a way, it's almost sad. It's like the guy who told the story is living in denial, trying desperately to prove to himself that it can be done, even down to changing the rules of the universe to do it. So Tokyo Revengers doesn't work for me as a standard action thriller. The fight scenes aren't terribly drawn, but thrillers are all about suspense, and this story is completely incapable of bringing out that emotion. One of the main goals from the start is just to get to meet Mikey, but only a few chapters in and we've already met him. And not only that, but Mikey has decided to make Takemichi one of his trusted friends alongside Draken. So the instant that Takemichi meets Mikey, immediately he's in the inner circle. Not through any decision of his own, just by chance. Just eliminating all the tension for no good reason whatsoever. So this doesn't work as an action thriller, because the action is not that inspired, and the thrills are not there. The real question now is, does it work as something else? Is there something that Tokyo Revengers excels at aside from what it overtly tries to be? Well, I want to say that it doesn't really work as a romance, but that's only if I look at it as a romance between Takemichi and Hana, because that relationship is boring as fuck. Let me set the stage. Tokyo Revengers is a great man manga, much like Gaki Daisho and Takaki Ryusei, but this time from the perspective of one of the weakling followers. The great man has inspired such emotions in the follower that he is moved to bend reality in his service. But is it really for the great man's sake that the follower bends reality? Perhaps it is in the follower's own self-interest, in his selfish desire, that he does so. Look at the emotions that Mankichi was inspiring in his followers, and even in people who weren't his followers. Takemichi is a weakling follower who dreams of meaning something to the leader he admires. Even into adulthood, when the glory days are long since past, he cannot move on. This follower will rewrite history to mean something to the one he admired. This manga is Takemichi's fanfiction. Mikey X reader, and he is the reader. He dreams of being saved, personally, by his leader, in a way that very strongly resembles the shoujo manga that we've gone over. He dreams not only of saving his leader, but of being the only one who can save him. He dreams of being hurt as well by his leader, in a way that only the leader can hurt him. He dreams of the two of them meaning something so special to each other that only the two of them can understand it, of being bound by fate through some supernatural means that will tear the universe apart to keep them together. To be clear, I have nothing from the text to support this reading that it's Takemichi's fanfiction. This isn't a theory. I don't do theories. I'm just trying to find something to appreciate in this travesty. If I do read it as Takemichi's fanfiction where he desperately tries to convince himself that he's straight, while also making himself the most important person in the world to Mikey, to the point where it completely overshadows his relationship with his own girlfriend, then maybe I can finally appreciate Tokyo Revengers. Listen, let me have this! This is the only way that I can enjoy that bullshit that I just read. I'm certain that Takemichi x Mikey has way more fanfictions than I can count. No doubt with much better writing than the original manga itself. What was that I said about some small things that irritated me? Oh yeah, also the cover for volume 14 is amazing. Windbreaker! Wow. Oh wow. This is it? This is getting an anime adaptation? This is like the Hitler of delinquent manga. Okay, I don't want to call the mangaka Hitler. Satoru Nii, the mangaka, seems to be a very nice person. I actually think this is the kind of manga that can't be made by a person who isn't nice. This is a manga made by the nicest person ever, probably. It's also boring as shit. You can tell that Satoru Nii is extremely well practiced in anatomy, perspective, body movement, motion, but despite it all, the manga has no swag. It's hollow, empty. Throughout your entire time reading this, you will not find a single page that will move you, a panel that will strike you, any moment at all that will take your breath away. This manga is a perfect example of the idea that technical mastery does not necessarily make for good art. There are so many manga out there that are so much more amateurish, so much more juvenile in their art and in their imagery, and yet they convey so much stronger emotion. You can practice your poses and your anatomy and your foreshortening and all that shit all you want, but if it's not in service of something that moves people emotionally, then what's the point? You remember how I complained so much about delinquent manga doing the whole bad delinquent antagonist thing as an instigator for action? It turns our delinquent characters into heroes, which I think would be best suited for a hero kind of story. Not that a delinquent character could never make for a good hero. Windbreaker's solution to the problem is that it just straight up turns our delinquents into police officers. I'm not exaggerating. Every single student at this school goes out to patrol the town in shifts and squads to keep the town safe, protecting them from harassment from other delinquent gangs. And the townspeople are so grateful that they constantly gift them with food and sweets and shit. The entire high school, which is, for all intents and purposes, just a normal delinquent high school where hierarchy is determined by strength, has a Bancho who's a super nice and righteous and heroic guy. Not in an interesting way, but rather in the most boring way you can possibly imagine. As if his entire personality was sandpapered over by someone trying to get him to run for president. The Bancho isn't our main character though. Our main character is this kid, half white and half black hair, heterochromia. This guy came right out of the DeviantArt playbook. The story keeps trying to convince us that he has this crippling personal defect, but all it amounts to is some social ineptitude. It would be fine if the manga treated it like the cute little quirk it is, but it keeps trying to make it this whole dark thing that torments his life, and this is not a story equipped to handle that baggage whatsoever. I mean, for fuck's sake, this guy defaults between two different emotions. He has an emotional range of two things. Excited for when a fight's about to happen, and a harmless, pretend angry for when people are nice to him. I'm exaggerating, of course. I can't even say the same for the rest of the cast. Unfortunately, and the manga's still running, but from what I've read, there's not even an average of 2 different facial expressions per character. Each character occupies one particular space, and they do not change from that. They're basically all just walking emojis, and they walk all over town patrolling it like some fucking police officers, man. And who do they protect the town from, you ask? Why, bad delinquents, of course. Guys who stir shit up, shake people down, and harass girls. Basically, guys who are very easy to fight against. Not only do they pose no physical threat to our martially superior main cast, but they also don't pose an ideological problem. There's never a point where fighting them causes our main characters to question themselves or what they're doing. These are very easy guys to fight. These enemy delinquent grunts are exactly how police officers view juvenile delinquents in real life. A caricature. Hollow. Empty, deserving of beatings. A beating is the only thing that can make them go away and stop being bad in front of you. The bosses of these bad delinquents, however, are a way bigger deal. They have evil eyes and an evil smile, and sometimes even a sad backstory. I should put sad in quotation marks there because it's not actually going to make you feel sad. It's just approximating what an AI-generated sad scene would look like. And these delinquent bosses also pose very little physical threat to our martially superior main cast. And also no ideological problem because they're just crazy psychopaths who like to terrorize people, so there's nothing there. Do you see what I'm getting at here? I said Clover was underwhelming, unremarkable, but at least it was readable. It had something there. Windbreaker is groundbreaking in the field of finding new ways to be completely devoid of meaning. I can't believe I wrote this out and recorded it and didn't realize at either point how stupid this makes me sound after having derived so much meaning from Windbreakers. I don't necessarily think that this is meaning intended by the author, but that doesn't matter. That's completely irrelevant because it's meaning that I derived nonetheless. Windbreaker is a police officer's young adult fanfiction. It paints a world where people are thankful to the police instead of hating them for their injustices. It paints a world where the things that they do and the things that they want to do are the right things. It's speculated by fans of Windbreaker, which I can't believe it even has, that the work was inspired by Tokyo Revengers. Tokyo Revengers I couldn't stop reading because it was like a train wreck. It was laughable. I couldn't wait to find out what bullshit the author would pull out of his ass next. Windbreaker, I'm lucky to have read 60 chapters of without fucking killing myself. There is no great train wreck. There is no great car crash or pileup. I keep trying to think of car-related metaphors. I was thinking like, this manga is a car that got an under-speeding ticket. But that would be interesting. It would suggest a pace so slow as to be meaningful, as to warrant attention. Windbreaker has no pacing problems, because to have pacing problems, you would need a story. Windbreaker would be a problem no matter how it was paced. Go too fast, go too slow, there's never a point where it's going to be just right. Windbreaker is a car going to the grocery store and then coming back, with no incident. In order to achieve a car crash pileup effect in a work of art, you need to at least have the drive to do something interesting. You need to aim at something emotionally resonant.
And then crash into it!
Windbreaker can't do that because all of its characters are like, you know those things Twitter artists make where they draw this white blob in the vague shape of a human and attach some TV tropes page to it, and they're like, this is my favorite trope, I hate this trope, shit like that. Windbreakers is just a bunch of those. The manga is still ongoing, but I can assure you that I won't be reading another chapter of this for the rest of my life.
90s!
Another delinquent manga about time travel. This one's still ongoing, so I can't say too much about it. If there's one thing I hope it does, I hope it tries to grapple with the legacy of delinquents in Japan, and with delinquent manga as a whole. A story where a modern delinquent kid gets thrown into the delinquent golden age, about 10 or 15 years late on that, but it's fine. Written by an author who at least actually understands what delinquents are about is very promising. Where I left off, the story was gearing up for another generic fight for the top of the school or top of the town or something. I hope it's all just a bait and switch, or the author's way of leading into something really meaningful. I don't think delinquent manga as a whole is missing another one of these stories. There's some heartwarming moments in here, some funny moments. The best stuff in Nine Peaks is the stuff that has nothing to do with fighting. I have faith that by the end it'll surprise us. I want to believe that it will surprise us. I really want a delinquent manga that has something to say about all this stuff. I mean, maybe I'm just an idiot. Maybe Nine Peaks already has been saying stuff about delinquents that I'm just missing out on. I do have a tendency to need art to spell things out for me.
Rankings! I previously had this recorded with my good microphone, but I feel like I need to clarify some more, and I don't have access to a good mic anymore, so let me explain here with my laptop mic. If we rank exclusively by objective characteristics, then it's Kongo Bancho and Torako, and then a massive canyon drop, and then everyone else. There wasn't enough room to put a massive canyon, so imagine there's a huge gap over here. I guess Momotaro and the Otokojuku guys should actually be closer to Torako than the rest of the pack, but whatever. I put the martial artists and those delinquents with borderline superpowers close to the middle and everybody else to the bottom. Now that's boring as fuck, isn't it? While it might make factual sense, it doesn't make any emotional sense whatsoever. There's no way you read Crows and Tokyo Revengers and come away from it thinking Mikey makes it even halfway through Suzerain. Why do I say that? Well, because if we talk it out for real talk, these guys would fucking laugh at these guys. Man, fuck it, let's rearrange this shit. Boom!
Now, you might notice some interesting developments, like why is the guy from Chameleon so much higher now? Well, I think his planning, his machinations, and his strange luck would give him an advantage over the rest of these rubes. I also forgot to put Tetsuya Iguchi in the first list, but whatever. Kiriki Tsukasa remains pretty low on the list because honestly I can barely think of a single character outside Bad Boys that he can beat. If I put Hidenori Danno on this list, then he'd probably be above the guy from Chameleon and maybe even above Hayato from Clover. I also boosted Megane-chan like crazy because it's very difficult to see her losing to the rest of these guys. I kinda fucked up by putting her lower than Yosuke Eguchi and Maeda Tyson. I also kinda fucked up putting Hiroshi and Toru a full level lower than them. I don't think they're that much weaker than those two. Maybe I should have even put Tyson below them. I also boosted Rei from Skeban Arashi just because, well, you might have noticed that the funnier characters tend to be higher on the list. A character's capacity for comedic shenanigans boosts their power ranking in my mind and in my heart. You might be saying, hey, you're just putting the characters you like above the characters you don't like. And to that I say, pretty much. But also I don't really give a fuck about Torako or the guy from Oscar Tebu, nor do I give enough of a fuck about Chameleon to rank this guy above these guys. And I don't care about Beelzebub either. I like Hiroshi Shinanogawa more than Mikey and Atsushi by a lot, but I still can't really see him beating them. I don't know. But yeah, my list is still objectively correct even though I acknowledge that there are problems with it. Don't ask me how that works. Another curious thing you might notice is that Bouya Haramichi is on here twice. Why is that, you ask? Well, I'll let good microphone me take over for that one. But you might have noticed that Bouya Haramichi is on here twice.
Yeah, we already went over that, man.
You see, while I can easily see Bouya Haramichi losing to Kongo Bancho at the beginning of Crows, and even in the middle of Crows, after the ending of Crows, I just don't really see it. And after having read Haramichi, I don't think anyone can beat Bouya Haramichi. He becomes more than just a man. I mentioned that he has the trappings of a folk hero, and that's because by the time you read Haramichi, you realize that this guy has transcended humanity. He exists not on the human plane of existence, but in a higher plane. In the platonic world of forms, he has become an idea, and no matter how hard you punch, you cannot defeat an idea. The entity that Bouya Haramichi becomes is the kind of guy who is designed, poetically, to defeat any challenger with ease, and to make his challengers change fundamentally as people. There are none upon this list who would walk away from Idea Michi unchanged. There's quite a few people who say they've met Bouya Haramichi in real life. I don't know about everybody else's claims, but I'll tell you this. When I was 14 years old, and keep in mind this is several years before I ever even read Crows, I didn't even know what Crows was. At that age, man, I'll be the first to admit it to you, I was not a good kid. I'm not very proud of the kind of person I was at 14, but who is, man? I kept on getting in trouble at school, and honestly, I was lucky to not get in trouble with the law. So, 14 years old, I'm walking down the streets of Casablanca. Now, for some reason, I've been walking around for an hour now, and nobody wants to bump into me. I don't want to go home yet, because I'm still too mad. Finally, I bump into a guy who's wearing what I would later learn is a Sukajan jacket. At the time, I'm just thinking this is a weird-ass fucking jacket. White sleeves, red torso, and a fucking tiger on the back. I didn't realize how cool I thought it was. So the guy bumps into me, and of course, this is the perfect opportunity. So I turn around, I call out to him, I walk up to him, and I grab him by the collar of his shirt. And then I wake up a half hour later in the middle of a mint vendor's cart, with 6 loose teeth, 2 numb legs, and a new pair of eyes. The sky never looked the same to me ever since that day. These are my favorites in order of release. Now let me organize them in order of how imperative it is that you experience them. I read way too much manga and watched way too much anime to make this video. I really hate the term consuming content when referring to watching, reading, listening to, or playing a work of art. But at times during the research phase of this video, it felt like I was doing exactly that. Maybe I was too uncharitable to a lot of the manga that I came across later on in the research phase. By that point, I had felt so lethargic from all the delinquent shit that I had immersed myself in that I just desperately wanted out. I still stand by all of my opinions, and I don't regret going about the video the way that I did. It's the only way to have gone about it unless I wanted to spend 2 years making it. I made my choice, and I think it was the better one. If anything, the only thing I regret was that I was too apologetic about the shit that I was criticizing. My next video is probably going to be a lot less focused than this. I just want to go off and experience art with no guidelines for a bit. You know, the way you're supposed to do it. Right now, I'm very excited to not read a single page of manga for at least another year. I have some books I've been meaning to get through, like this book on Jesse James that I stopped in the middle of before I started the video, or these Clive Barker books. And I'm only 3 books into the King James Bible. And I've also only seen a grand total of like 6 horror movies. And like Resident Evil 4, I finally got Resident Evil 4 and Metal Gear Solid 5 and Final Fantasy X and 13. I've been meaning to play those games since forever. Wait, what was I talking about? Delinquent manga, yeah.